Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I sit up with a start, rising from my bed covers like a seal's black head emerging above the ocean waves. I'm wiping away the beads of sweat that have gathered across my forehead with the back of my arm. The salty liquid is pouring down my back, trickling down my legs like the raindrops on a window pane. And it's not even a hot night, nor am I going through the change of life. I'm only 35 years old, so this can't be the menopause. My body is trembling, and I know it's due to this interminable, dreadful dream that persistently haunts me, although the dream seems so benign, so innocuous, so unoffensive. For some cryptic, unfathomable reason, it provokes in me an unwarranted, irrational distress that I can't explain. My husband is rolled over comfortably on the side of the bed. He's fast asleep, blindly oblivious to the emotional turmoil I'm experiencing, as his light snores filter through the room. Our black and white Cheshire cat, Pluto, is lying curled up against my husband's stationary back, giving me a curious look through his yellow eyes, as if to say, "What's up with you?" I don't imagine he's surprised to see me sitting up again, as I've been making a habit of this behaviour of late. Pluto sagaciously never sleeps with me. He knows I'm far too restless for him, while my husband remains unflinching in his sleep, maintaining the same position as a stoic, moss-covered log lying across the forest floor. For a moment I cling to the bed covers. My unmoving eyes stare vacantly ahead of me as I adjust to the light. I try to assimilate the meaning of my dream and what it could mean, and why something so anodyne is causing me such a perplexing angst. The bedroom is bathed in the dark shadows of the night, so that all our furniture has become like obscure dense silhouettes, with a rude solid density that makes their forms and shapes appear almost obnoxiously sinister. But it doesn't faze me at all, as I know what each familiar dark form actually represents. There's a television set situated near the far end of the room, perched above a large television stand. To the left of the room is an elegant upholstered chair and a large glass coffee table, opulently framed in an elaborate wrought iron that serenades the large fireplace that we only ever use here in the winter, when it's bitingly cold, and the orange flames crackle away merrily in the hearth. At times like this, the room becomes like a cosy den. Pluto wisely refuses to leave his new perch on that chair, but tonight it's neither hot nor cold. It's a perfect, pleasing temperature, which you would expect in early spring. I climb out of bed, slipping into the ensuite bathroom, where I quickly fumble around with my fingers, trying to find the light switch. Finally, I find it, and I'm relieved when the light does come on, which is rather bright for my blurry, rather sleepy eyes that are not yet used to the obtrusive brightness, so I keep them half open. My bladder now stings with fullness, and it needs emptying, and once I relieve myself, I dry my body down with a towel, realizing that my pyjamas are completely soaked from all my sweat. If I didn't know better, I would say I took a random dip in our swimming pool and returned to bed in my dripping clothes without bothering to change. I am tempted to wake up my husband, but then what's the point? I'll only be welcoming a repeat of Groundhog Day over and over again, although in this case it's Groundhog Night, as I tell him about my dream that I've told him 1,000 times before. He'll listen to me with a sombre seriousness, but he's unable to offer me much comfort, so what's the use of actually waking him up? So you say you're dreaming about that abandoned house, further down the road from us, the one that's been empty for about 4 years now, a long time, and this house is giving you nightmares? That makes no sense to me. How can an abandoned house you barely even know give you nightmares? I don't know. I know it's irrational. I know it doesn't make any sense. But every time I dream of that house, it physically makes me recoil. It makes me squirm. I don't know what it is, but it's really, really intimidating. That's very peculiar, says my husband. Shall I make you some warm milk and honey? Will that make you feel better? Ease away some of the stress? Thanks. That will be kind, I'd said. I knew that exactly the same scenario would play out again if I woke my husband up now. There'd be warm milk and honey to sip in a lovely mug, followed by my husband's reassuring, soothing words. But none of that was working to ease the level of trepidation I was currently experiencing about that abandoned house that is niggling me so much, like an itch I want to desperately scratch. But worse still, an itch that I simply can't reach. The house had been owned by a family who'd moved to the countryside from New York to embrace a more relaxing, serene way of life. But it had got too much for them. I think they couldn't bear the peaceful tranquility and isolation of country life. It would seem they hankered after the vibrant buzz and throbbing heartbeat of the cosmopolitan city, the hip and happening coffee bars, the cheerful chatter of people, the marvellous shopping opportunities with inviting window displays to tempt your burning pockets, the drama from a plethora of theatres, and the sizzling nightlife, the drunken laughs and dancing people. One day this ambiguous family just up and left, without a word to anyone, and the last I heard was they'd returned to New York City, without even bothering to put the countryside property on the market. It seemed incredulous that they didn't even want to get the financial benefits from a sale, but I have learnt in life that some people are enigmatic to say the least, and that has to be true. A good friend of mine who lived in town, called Jackie Haynes, became acquainted with the Baxter family. She told me they'd tirelessly groaned and moaned about how they hated living in the countryside, as there was nothing to do here, and the nightlife pretty much sucked. It would seem that a life in the countryside that had so eagerly seduced them with its attractive appeal, but the rosy allure had soon faded, dried up, crumbled away in their hands like a dried-up flower, and fallen apart. I gather they do that a lot in Russia. The young people abandon their houses in the countryside, move to the cities like St. Petersburg. It's possibly done here too, but not on the same grand scale found in Russia. I do understand that some city dwellers simply can't hack a life in the countryside, even if on the surface it initially was so seductive, seemed romantically alluring, so picturesque, so dreamy. Indeed, I know this because I was born and raised in New York myself, and I have friends who would find living my more solitary lifestyle completely insufferable, and have admitted as much to me. I, on the other hand, was born in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, where there was a country girl inside me bursting and burning to come out and be fully expressed. When I met my husband Peter, who is a writer by profession, often writing scripts for plays and movies, it was the most obvious, unambiguous thing for us to do, to move to the countryside. For many writers need their space and privacy, a place where they can work in tranquil solitude, devoid of intrusive distractions, and surrounded by great beauty, which helps to spark their inspiration. So moving out here was a no-brainer for us. I'm not exactly sure why we ended up in Kentucky of all places, but we did, and in truth I really love it here. I think it was the charming, almost fairy tale-like quality of our farmhouse we moved into that literally sealed the deal for me. In truth, I'm a terrible romantic at heart, and our dreaming, wistful farmhouse was poetry in motion. It really was. It is a whimsical, enchanting place that I'd been dreaming about since I was a young girl. An unassuming, whitewashed, double-story symmetrical farmhouse, which may sound ordinary, but it isn't, and has so much in common and synchronicity with its classical English equivalent. Indeed, if you saw it parked on a village green in the English countryside, it would absolutely, unequivocally belong. It oozes charm and character, while roses tumble like laughter down the walls of the house, and the large French windows open out onto spectacular views of the viridescent countryside, scattered so generously with trees, while to the rear of the property you'll find that it's hugged cosily by an inviting wraparound porch that overlooks a silvery pond, surrounded by a couple of weeping willows with curvaceous branches, hefty crooked trunks, and feather boa-like leaves that skim the surface of the water so elegantly. We live not far from Augusta, known as one of the most picturesque towns in Kentucky, with notable landmarks like the Mammoth Cave, the Cumberland Gap, and Shaker Village. It is in Bracken County and is geographically located on the southern banks of the Ohio River. Suffice to say, I would drive past the sorrowful, deserted house on my way to work every day, and over the last few years it was becoming more and more desolate-looking, almost as if it sensed it was neglected, underappreciated, and estranged. It was brewing in its own melancholia. I think the family had also ditched Pluto, our adopted, beloved Cheshire cat. Let's just say one day shortly after the family had vanished into the sunset, I saw Pluto running across the overgrown yard, diving into one of the dusty open windows of the abandoned old colonial home. I grew very concerned about Pluto's welfare. He didn't look like a feral cat, but he might just become that way, without any kind intervention. I remember, even though I was on my way to work at the time, where I worked for the local conjoined bookshop and coffee shop in town, I just had to stop. I was a passionate animal lover, and learning that the family had left the property unoccupied meant I naturally became solicitously apprehensive about their cat. I parked my car on the side of the road, dashing into the abandoned house. As the front door had been kicked down, the wooden panels appeared to have been shredded apart, and for a door so solid, it was curiously bizarre. I found the affectionate black Pluto, with white socks on his paws and a distinguished white moustache with a matching bib on the front of his chest, lying comfortably curled up in a ball on a fully made bed that was now covered in a thin layer of dust. My heart melted like butter for poor Pluto, who looked a little thin and emaciated, and his coat was a bit manky. He was full of fleas. I picked him up and brought him home with me, and fed him, and the rest, of course, is history. I was appalled that these people had dumped their own cat. By all accounts, they left the place fully furnished, and there was even mouldy food I noticed in the refrigerator, so it looked like they'd evacuated their home on an impulsive whim. In my mind's eye, I get the feeling that one day the head of the family just said, "I can't hack another day of listening to bird song and the wind whistling through the trees. Let's get the hell out of here, shall we? We need to get back to the bright, buzzing lights of the city, the honking taxi horns, the chattering people, the buzzy, vibey restaurants, to feel alive and vibrant again." That's what I personally believe actually happened. So getting back to the immediate moment, where I hear my husband's gentle snores, observe the rise and fall of his chest, I can see he's out for the count. He's fast asleep. I glance at the digital bedside clock, which registers 1 o'clock in the morning. I have a phenomenal idea. In hindsight, maybe it wasn't such a great idea after all. But the abandoned house, situated further down our road, that features so dramatically in all of my lucid nightmares, under the shadowy light of a full moon, appears to be speaking to me in my subconscious mind. It's calling my name, in the sombre, foreboding stillness. Maybe the house itself wants to get my attention for some reason. I mean, stranger things have happened. Maybe if I went to visit the house right now, I could make sense of why it is featuring in my dream so explicitly. It's like I'm being nudged and asked to pay attention to that dream. There was no time like the present, so I thought. I cautiously ambled over to my wardrobe and grabbed my tracksuit and trainers, along with my windbreaker, as it can get quite chilly out of doors. I'm thankful for my husband's ability to sleep through almost anything. A year ago, me and my husband were fortunate guests on a friend's yacht. Well, actually, not so fortunate, really. A wild, unbridled storm was brewing. A reckless lightning was striking viciously. It plundered the dark sky that night with jagged yellow flashes that pierced through the tumultuous ocean waves. The weather showed no mercy. Indeed, the whole yacht was shaking precariously, rocking backwards and forwards, while angry ocean waves were spraying the decks with a magnanimous amount of water. Everyone on board that yacht was terrified, but not my husband. No, not him. He slept through the entire thing. Woke up the following morning asking us why we were wearing hangdog expressions, why we looked so haggard, as if our energy had been vacuumed out of us. It was a rough night, we told him last night. There were some hair-raising near-death moments. Really, said my husband, you do surprise me. I never felt a thing. I had a very good night's sleep, I might tell you. Boy, did I envy him for being able to sleep like that. I tiptoe onto the landing, my sneakers squeaking on the oakwood floors. I glide down the sweeping staircase, with Pluto padding close behind me. He knows if I'm up, there's the potential for a treat, and I don't disappoint. I dutifully oblige my cat, and all his carnal cravings, while I open a cupboard in the kitchen to retrieve a can of tuna for him, which I place on a plate, and he vacuums it up hungrily. I give him a nod as I creep out of the kitchen door, closing it gently behind me, so the door clicks in its slot. I amble over to the paved driveway, to my car, a white Toyota Corolla. I'm greeted to a cool, biting wind that nips against my neck, punneling my long dark hair backwards with its feisty gusts. But I don't care. I need to do this for some reason. The moon is full tonight, just like it is in my dream. It bleaches the sky with a generous ethereal light that dances gracefully across the vegetation and the white walls of our home. I climb into my car, placing my torch on the opposite seat. I put on my safety belt, although why I do this I don't know, but you can't be too careful, can you? I start up the engine and burst down the driveway with an enthusiastic ebullience. If my husband could see me now, he'd probably be having kittens. But what he doesn't know won't actually hurt him. I'm driving down the lumpy road that once was asphalted, I have to say, but over the years it's been overgrown with grass and has become deflectively cracked and, of course, rather ruptured. Finally, I find myself outside the abandoned house that is nestled only 50 feet away from the road. Then I see it. My blood runs cold. There's an unfamiliar black minivan parked close to the abandoned building that I've never ever seen before, and for some reason its ambiguous presence causes my heckles to rise. What is it doing parked outside this abandoned building? I can see flickering lights through one of the windows of the house. Someone is there. I can hear a strange chanting sound. It's more than one person. It's coming from the house. My curiosity is arrested and aroused, but not in a good way. Something feels seriously off about this, and I feel a heaviness descend over me that makes me feel very guarded and very unnerved. Something is very wrong. I need to find out exactly what's going on. I'm not the kind of person that likes to be left wondering about something, as mysteries of any kind need to be solved. I decide to park my car in an inconspicuous, well-camouflaged location, concealed by a couple of trees. I climb out of it cautiously, closing the door behind me discreetly and quietly. I'm not remotely afraid. Maybe I should be. Indeed, fear has not played any role in my mind so far. It doesn't exist on the central stage of my focus. Well, not yet. All reticent, retiring and uncertain thoughts are snatched and discarded, cast aside like the cigarette butts on an ashtray. Instead, an inspirited, inquiring intrigue smoulders up in my mind. It crackles away happily like the merry fire in a hearth, growing stronger, more audacious in its plucky assertiveness. The intrepid adventurer within me that I'm not well acquainted with, unflinchingly guides me with a circumspect prudency and wary vigilance through the trees that fringe the property on every side, like a tall border of verdant bushy hedges, with the exception of the front of the house, that overlooks the dusty, cracked, rather remote, sad road, which, like everything else tonight, is plundered in darkness, with a tidal wave of delicate diaphanous light. I am stealthily slinking surreptitiously through the trees. Their tall, voluptuous shapes soar up proudly into the twilight, in a tenebrous, disfigured, lumpy haze that is not clearly discernible. They rather remind me of black cardboard cutouts at this time of night. Their graceful boughs swagger as the wind whistles. It punnels furiously against my windbreaker. I notice that there are no sounds tonight that I'm normally so familiar with. There are no crickets, nor are there frogs. There aren't any owl hoots or coyote calls. It's airily quiet, bodefully inauspicious, hauntingly spookish. I can't shake off the overwhelming feeling that I'm being watched. I glance around the woodland trees that rustle against the spirited windy assault, but there's no one there. But why do I feel as if I'm being watched? The spine-chilling feeling keeps clinging to me, like a sticky spider web that I just can't shake off. My cautious, carefully orchestrated movements are not accommodating. It's difficult to be quiet, for even with the greatest of effort, the leaf litter beneath the rubber soles of my shoes is announcing my presence to any woodland creature that might be around. But I know whatever is in that house making that strange chanting sound will never hear me. They're making too much noise themselves. I run over to the side of the house, and the chanting becomes louder and louder and louder. I slip through the half-open door. I must be mad, but I do. And I peer in at a scene that until now I thought only belonged in the movies. How wrong I was about that. I observe about 15 rather inconspicuous human figures. Their backs are thankfully turned away from me. I would hate for them to see me. They're wearing long, dark, loose hooded robes that conceal their faces and brush against their ankles. They're holding black candles in their hands that are flickering in the darkness. There's a masked man who's clearly leading the ceremony, and if he was to look up in my direction, he could possibly see me. But I'm reasonably satisfied that I'm clandestinely cloaked in the dark corner, and am unlikely to be observed. The man with the mask that looks like a long beak has raised up a silver goblet in his hands, and he's speaking out in words that I can't comprehend. Umani canifona duandino ganolesana shanta maganala. But one word I keep hearing over and over again is Hail Lucifer! Hail Lucifer! The people continue to chant, Umani canifoni duandino canilosini, Hail Lucifer Shanta Maginola. I can't believe what is going on. I can't believe it. And there is a figure lying in the middle of the floor that appears to be wiggling. The one hooded figure is carrying an executioner's sword in his hand. I've never seen such a savage, brutal-looking knife that could hack off a human head in a second. Of course, that's what he's about to do, isn't he? He's about to perform a blood sacrifice. Oh, my God! Are they about to kill a human being? Whatever that thing is wiggling in the middle of the floor, it looks to be like a child. But I can't be sure. My blood is running cold. All of a sudden, a huge hand pushes past me, as if I'm blocking their access. Then I observe this massive 9-foot figure, who barges boldly into the ceremony and begins to throw the hooded figures around the room like 100 dices across the floor. The hooded figures begin to scream as they desperately try to escape. This imposing, lofty creature is roaring. His blazing yellow eyes glare like yellow traffic lights at these beings. The hooded figures begin to run. They dash out of the house, thrashing across the wooden floor as fast as their legs can possibly carry them, dropping their candles and cast iron holders onto the wooden floor. The next thing I hear is the black minivan starting up hurriedly, its doors slamming violently. It chokes and splutters in its eagerness to get away. It heaves as it gracelessly spins away at breakneck speed until all the hooded figures are gone. I'm left standing there, trembling like a blancmange jelly, unable to move or do anything. It's like I'm encased in a cocoon from which I can't escape. I do not feel fear, not even at this stage. I think I'm feeling disorientated and confused, as if someone has whacked me over the head so violently hard that I've almost lost sight of my bearings, for I'm trying to assimilate what has just transpired. It seems so incredibly surreal. The next thing I know is an overlong arm grabs me gently. I hear a voice in my head saying, "Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you. Please come with me." The huge giant-like creature leads me towards the bundle in the floor. That's when I see the figure, about the size of a large Labrador dog, but it looks more like a mixed breed of some kind. The dog's front paws are tied behind its back. Its back legs are shackled. Its jaw is tied together with string. And this trembling poor dog is cowering with terror, as if resigned to its fate. The poor thing is so panic-stricken, I almost want to cry. On bended knees, I stroke his long fur lovingly. I try to calm him down. "It's all right, boy. It's all right. You're going to be fine. You're safe now. No one can hurt you." I know they tie dogs like this in the meat market in China, and it makes me sick to my stomach. They claim that a dog's terror and the increase in adrenaline makes the meat taste delicious. How can people be this sick, eating a man's best friend? For years I've posted up petitions to try and ban this dreadful practice in China, but to no avail. They seem hell-bent on indulging in a practice that is morally corrupt, and no one does a thing about it, when everyday dogs are being hacked to death in China like this. I look up at the very large creature, whom I haven't really observed properly. He had brought me over to see the dog. I realise he's a Bigfoot. I cannot believe what I'm beholding. I mean, are these creatures even real? They obviously are. Our eyes meet, and in this revelatory moment, I realise that his eyes are angelic, and that he's equally as mortified about what just transpired here, which is why he broke up the ceremony. I have no way to express to you the magnificence of this creature's eyes, but they were mirrors of his soul. Of that I'm in no doubt, revealing the undisguised goodness in his heart. There was such a noble quality to him, a distinguished, regal-looking human face, that made me think of an Indian chief wearing a full headdress of eagle's feathers. He possessed such a masculine face with high, distinguished cheekbones, a heavy, square jawline, a pronounced forehead, and a hooded but deep-set pair of eyes. This majestic Bigfoot, or hairy man, is impressively big, hefty, burly, in all his generous proportions, but is also graceful in his agility and poise. His hair is long and flowing, the colour of grey ash, and he certainly does not smell. Let's just say if the Bigfoot had not intervened in time and thrown those hooded figures around so violently, like clothes on a heavily soiled cycle in a washing machine, and scared them off with such success, this poor dog that I'm looking at now would have become a sacrifice. There are melted black candles on the floor everywhere, with their distorted wicks and congealed wax dribbled all over, splashed across the wood like a David Hockney painting. The candles have been expeditiously abandoned by the terrified hooded figures in their anguished haste to escape the screaming, incandescent Bigfoot. I'm quite certain they thought they were going to be eaten by the creature, as the Bigfoot deliberately scared them half to death. The man with the executioner's knife had been waving it around at the Bigfoot, whom was undaunted by the deadly weapon. I can't help wondering if they thought the Bigfoot was a demon that they had conjured up from one of their inauspicious chants. I hope they think twice about worshipping Lucifer again. I'm sure they will. There are the remnants of dropped candles lying on the floor, now contorted, deformed, misshapen and bent, flickering in the light, melting into voluptuous twisted heaps like the stalagmites in a cave. While the full moon has cast its ethereal shadows around the room, I see a pentagram carved in the wooden floor, blood stains that have saturated the floorboards, staining them in dried puddles of scarlet, that poignantly speak of the indelible sacrifices that have not been so lucky to escape the executioner's sword, that have been surrendered to Lucifer as a sacrificial offering. There's a plethora of cold, hardened black candle wax everywhere that has been left here from previous rituals, which I think has been taking place for quite some time, or since the house became unoccupied. There's angry graffiti painted over the walls in bright primary colours, with upside-down crosses and words that read, "Praise Lucifer, the light-bearer, the beautiful one." The Bigfoot tugs off the strings that have held the dog captive to his fate. The dog is unable to believe he's been set free from his restraints. He cowers in the corner and then tries to frantically run away. I dash after him, cradling him gently in my arms. "You must keep him," I hear the Bigfoot saying in my head. "He needs your kindness to heal from his trauma. They will not be back, but they have unleashed darkness into this space." I nod and say, "You will help me take him to my car. I'm going to adopt him. I'm taking him home with me." I know the Bigfoot understands what I've said, as he's read my mind. So he picks up the dog in his arms and carries him to my car, putting him in the front seat next to me. The Bigfoot nods at me. He watches me drive away into the night, with my furry companion at my side. I wave at the Bigfoot, and then he's gone. Let's just say it took a week for my dog Casper to recover from the events of that dreadful, inauspicious night. Believe me, my dog knew he'd been spared from certain death. Animals are clever, they know things. He was so grateful to be alive, and soon became so affectionate, regaining his trust in human beings. I honestly don't know how he could. If you think that is the end of my story, you would be very wrong. By all accounts, my husband was not at all happy that I got up at 1 o'clock in the morning to visit an abandoned house that appeared to be calling me in my dreams. But for some reason, I was meant to visit that house, as all my nightmares stopped after I visited the place. Ostensibly beyond the ugly scene, I had the misfortune to witness where those hooded figures were worshipping Lucifer. It wasn't all bad, as not only did I have a chance encounter with a Bigfoot, but I became the owner of a remarkable dog. I am absolutely certain that the Bigfoot I encountered knew exactly what these devil worshippers were toying with. In my opinion, he has a great understanding of the spirit world and was trying to put a stop to this grievous evil that was being welcomed and conjured up into our realm by these hooded figures. He terrorized them to scare them away from their foolish practices, and in my opinion, they shan't be worshipping Lucifer in a hurry after that dreadful scare. If I were wearing their shoes, I certainly wouldn't. What do they say? Once burnt, twice shy. Suffice to say, I was hoping that the old colonial abandoned house would be bulldozed one day, but it was not to be. It was about 1.5 years later. I noticed a sold sign outside the house, and then there was a team of builders on the property, working assiduously on the project, and 2 years later, a couple with a 4-year-old daughter had moved into the house. They were described as a genuinely warm, friendly couple. I suppose I should have popped around as a friendly, dutiful neighbour that lived further down the road, but I couldn't do it. You see, for me, despite the improved renovations to the property, it remained in my mind, forever tainted and soiled by the iniquitous practices that I'd seen taking place there. I couldn't forget it. To think that those Satan worshippers had nearly sacrificed my dog Casper to Lucifer. It was something that grieved me greatly. I just didn't want to go anywhere near the hauntingly bodeful place. And despite the fact that the property now looked amazing, with mowed lawns, trimmed hedges, borders filled with pretty flowers, walls painted in a gleaming white, a grey slate roof, and brand new fixtures and fittings for the windows, I wondered privately to myself if the owners had any idea about what had happened there. Had they observed the carved pentagram in the floor, the ominous bloodstains, the black candle wax, the ugly graffiti praising Lucifer, the upside-down crosses? Could it be that the macabre evidence of what had transpired in the house, being clandestinely expunged in some way? I mean, if I was to see a property like that, I'd run a mile. My husband emphatically believed that all the evidence of the Satan worshippers would have been surreptitiously removed with a quick coat of paint and some floor sanding by a savvy estate agent who would have known that such a gruesome exhibit would almost certainly turn off potential buyers. I discerned that my husband was possibly right. The charmingly evocative bookshop where I worked in town had a coffee shop attached to it, so you could buy a book and read it in the coffee shop, or you could browse through the books and enjoy a coffee, a cake, or even a slight savoury snack for lunch. The sumptuously cosy setup appeared to attract people like bees to a honeypot, offering wistful, nostalgic feelings of comfort for those that enjoy the rich, romantic, sentimental pleasure of stories. We would find the book sales increased exponentially in the store, as people desiring a coffee would be tempted to just look through the books, and then they would leave with a book in their hands that they had probably never intended to buy in the first place, as in passing they'd just fancied a cappuccino or a latte. Let's just say there is something about the lure of books and coffee that attracts people to the store. It was a wonderful bookshop. There were shelves piled high with a magnificent selection of books, from fiction to non-fiction, to the most picturesque poetic books that would be proud to grace any coffee table in your home, with large pages of colourful photographs on topics to inspire your interest and intrigue. I've always loved working in bookshops, as I'm a passionate reader myself. It was a memorable, prepossessing day, as after the long drawn-out winter months, you could sense a definite shift in the mood of the people in town, as the implacable spring sunshine was zealously bursting through the cobalt blue sky, and the whimsical planters on the street were now filled with pink, red, coral and white-coloured geraniums that tumbled gracefully over the sides of the pots, covered in a plethora of blossoms. The once barren leaves of the deciduous trees had sprouted new life. They were ablaze with the first shoots of their verdant foliage. I observed a pretty young lady on the pavement. She was wearing a bright yellow cotton sundress, with white daisies on it, with shoestring straps and a white belt around her narrow waist, and a yellow band over her long dark hair. She stopped and looked into the bookshop, pressing her face against the window to look through the glass, so that her nose smudged the pane. She cautiously opened the door and walked into the shop. The inside bell tingled. She was holding a cute little girl's hand with blonde curls, a heart-shaped face, and very inquiring, spirited blue eyes. I thought this little girl's mother was pretty, with a demure reticence about her, which contradicted the bright colour she was wearing. The type of person that gladly would shrink into the shadows at a social event, a party, or a book club. The little girl was trying to drag her mother over to the kiddies section. "Mummy, look, there are lots of stories over there. Look, can we get the Curious Garden and the Lion and the Mouse, please? Please, Mummy, I want these books." The woman glanced up at me briefly. Her face became white. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. For a moment she stared at me, and sensing she was being rude, she quickly looked away. But when she thought I wasn't looking, she stared at me again. She then moved towards the children's books, with her mind far away from Kiddy's books. But she put up a good pretense and kept giving me sideways glances while sifting through the books with her child. I had one question on my mind. Why is this woman staring at me? Merildev's story. I wasn't happy that my impetuous, unrepressed husband had bought an old abandoned house. But this was the kind of thing Keith would do. Why was I surprised? I mean, my capricious husband was impulsive, rash, and instinctive at the very best of times, and he sensed a house going for such a good price was not to be sneezed at. And as we could bring the old colonial house back to speed with some tender loving care, why not? My husband was a visionary who could see the potential in anything that looked like it had long since lost its brilliant shine, gloss, and lustre. My husband had a passion for all things old that had seen better days and looked woefully sorry for itself. One of his passions was antiques. He loved to find treasure in the most unlikely, obscure of places. On one garage sale he frequented, he found a piece of artwork done by a famous artist. Of course he didn't know that at the time, but under all the goo and dust, it looked negligible, insignificant, run-of-the-mill, until the painting was finally restored and a collector bought it from my husband at a price that simply changed our lives from a financial perspective, and for that I was ever grateful to him. This colonial house had been sitting nestled on this piece of land, about 50 feet away from the road, abandoned and forsaken, for about 4 or 5 years, I think. It was surrounded by a tall thicket of trees on every side. At one time it looked like it was an imposing building, but now it looked as if it was almost sinking in an ocean of its own melancholia, as it was being cruelly strangled by the asphyxiating plant life, attacked fiercely by bad weather that had encouraged mildew and mould to grow exponentially around the house, along with damp raining conditions to encourage warping, sagging and rotting. Then there had been an abundance of animal life visiting the house, from rats, mice, spiders to moths. It would seem the owners had fled to New York, but finally they had remembered the run-down, dilapidated building that had once been their home and put it on the market, possibly realizing that there was some money to be made on the property. How I wished they hadn't. By all accounts, they were terribly lucky that the house didn't have to be bulldozed, as against all the odds, the high-quality roofing had remained intact, which had been the house's one saving grace. I'll never forget the first time I saw that house. It gave me the creeps. It looked sad and dejected, as angry variegated creeper had wound itself around the house like an anaconda squeezing the life out of its prey. Let's just say the house was suffocated by this jutting, invasive, tenacious plant, as it rudely wormed its way through the windows and even the chimneys, where it had been growing through the fireplaces and straddling the walls so voraciously. My husband had looked at me like a little boy who discovered a treasure trove of candy and asked me, "Well, what do you think?" He was grinning from ear to ear, his eyes sparkling brightly. I didn't want to crush my husband's enthusiasm, but I hated this house. Everything about it I loathed. I don't like it, I admitted. The place, well, it feels, I'm not sure what the word is, creepy, sinister, uncongenial, I suppose.
Of course, that's how you feel about it, sweetheart. Remember when I brought that painting from the yard sale? You took one look at it and pooh-poohed it. You said it belonged in the trash, but it was worth a fortune when it was cleaned up. That painting has changed our lives, you've got to admit it. We would never ever be considering buying a house with this kind of potential without that injection of cash in our lives, would we?
No, I admit we wouldn't, and that is true. But why is it, when you want to get your way, Keith, you keep returning me back to that old painting? It's like you're saying, I can see the potential of something that you can't.
But it's true, sweetheart, I can. You're looking at the knee-high overgrown grass in the yard, the thick congealed dust cloaking everything, the peeling paint, the cracks in the walls, the dilapidated sagging state of the building, the walls hemorrhaging rust, the cobwebs gracing every available corner, and the plethora of rat droppings scattered everywhere. Naturally, it's not a pretty picture on the surface. Try and expand your vision, sweetheart. Think about the renovations that would restore this place. Mowed grass, a pretty front yard. Then you will see what this place could potentially become. It's oozing so much promise, but you're seeing it as a lost, hopeless cause, not worth investing in. And that is what I call appallingly short-sighted. Don't you think it's odd that the floor in the main lounge has been sanded down and that some of the walls have been painted over? I mean, it's a little like painting a small area on a rusty tin can. I mean, who does that? And why? What are they hiding from us? Oh, I spoke to the estate agent about that, sweetheart. It would seem the owner discovered the place had been taken over by squatters. There was a huge amount of candle wax all over the floor. It was a huge mess. It's a miracle the place did not burn down, I gather. And there was offensive graffiti on the walls as well, which the owner decided to paint over. He didn't want to put off potential buyers.
Are you kidding me? If he didn't want to put off potential buyers, he might as well have renovated the place himself.
I mean, I'm sorry, but the peeling paint and the invasive creeper that has decided to strangle every wall of this house is far more offensive than a bit of graffiti. I don't know what you see in this place. I really don't, Keith. It gives me the heebie-jeebies. If I may remind you, that's exactly what you said to me about the painting. Even though I tried to fight my corner as hard as I could, reminding my husband that we had a 3-year-old daughter to consider, and renovations would be rather destructive for an impressionable little girl, my husband could not be otherwise persuaded to change his mind. Let's just say Keith had been head of the debating team at school, and he persuasively won his debates with an adept silvery tongue that always knew the right thing to say, to cast reasonable doubt on to something or to throw a spanner into the works. So invariably he always won, even the most unlikely of arguments. Everyone said he was in the wrong profession, and he was. He'd have been a great criminal lawyer for the defence, casting enough doubt on the prosecution witnesses in order to get the guilty party off. Let's just say his ability to win an argument was masterful. I'd learnt to quit while I was ahead a long time ago. I knew it was fruitless arguing with my husband, as when he had his heart set on something, wild horses would not tear him away from his goal. Besides, arguing with him was exhausting. I would feel like one of those frazzled mothers at the grocery store when your kid is pestering you for sweets. Please, Mummy, please can I have the candy? Please, please, please. Until eventually the poor woman is worn down, so she gives in to her daughter's demands. Frankly, she's too tired to put her foot down. In truth, arguments with my husband would make me feel just like that, or like a goldfish thrown out of a tank of water, struggling to draw breath. I knew I'd be banging my head against a brick wall if I put up any resistance, so I crumbled, like a demolished building collapsing to the ground, as I surrendered to his will. In truth, I was slowly warming to the idea of the house, as my husband had adeptly persuaded me that it was a great investment, and I knew more often than not he was usually right about most things. The problem was I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling that seemed to seep through my thoughts, rather like the dirty drain water through a crack in the walls, that something didn't actually feel right about the place. But whatever it was, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Before long there were builders working on the property, but one day my husband returned home with an ashen face, saying 2 builders had quit the job and weren't coming back. "But why?" I asked, looking appalled. My husband ran his hand through his buoyant blonde curls, that always made him look younger than his years, and softened the contours of his masculine jawline. For a moment he didn't answer me, and then he said gingerly, "One of the men claimed something pushed him down the staircase and growled at him. He actually wet his pants, he was so terrified, and ran from the house. He's refusing to continue to work for us. And the other man claimed someone kicked him in the back, and when he turned around, nothing was there. But he sensed something foreboding was watching him." "Oh my God! You don't think the house is haunted, do you?" "Don't be ridiculous. Maybe the men were out of sorts, seeing things that weren't there. There's always a plausible explanation for things." I wasn't convinced by my husband's reasoning, but after that inauspicious hair-raising incident, the builders no longer reported any strange activity in our home, which made me reasonably reassured that nothing untoward was going on in the property, and that the 2 builders that initially abandoned the project had got ants in their pants about absolutely nothing. I will admit, when we moved into the colonial house, once it was restored, it looked incredible. I felt as if I had time-travelled to another place, another era in our rich, vibrant history, for the house was so traditional in every regard, proudly wallowing in its heritage, like a reticent young girl suddenly coming out of her reserve that had held her back for so long. It was almost as if the newly revitalised house began to fully appreciate that she was no longer a lost cause, as she had been brought back from her debilitating, emaciated state to her full glory. Why had I ever doubted my husband's ability to see the potential in something most people would deem as a fruitless project with little hope of a successful outcome? How wrong I was. Suffice to say, much like the painting congealed by dust that my husband had painstakingly restored,
The sagging, dilapidated house that appeared to be shrinking from age, crumbling under the weathering of time, with wrinkling skin decaying on its heavy foundations, and with sunken, sorrowful hollows for windows, and ugly invasive liver spots mottling the walls, not to mention out-of-control wispy hair, seen in the variegated ivy that had sprouted through every orifice like out-of-control unwanted facial hair. By all accounts, the makeover of the property had thrust a brand new building from yesteryear into our time-space, so that it shone like a brand new pin. The white walls gleamed against the perfectly manicured verdant lawns of the home, and the neat little box hedges framed the sandstone walkway to the front door. It all looked so perfect. I took in a deep breath as my eyes travelled over every nook and cranny, as I drank in every inch of the house with a fervent appreciation, like savouring a glass of full-bodied wine, and noting all the subtle woody and fruity notes. "What do you think?" my husband had asked me, smiling proudly with a "I told you so" look on his face. "I think it's beautiful," I said. "Really, really beautiful." I give him a huge hug. "I should have never doubted you for a moment. You win, Keith. You were right about this place. It's a knockout. I can't believe I was so blindsighted." "You and most of the population," my husband teased. "Most people judge a book by its cover. It's human nature. You see it all the time. I was watching an America's Got Talent show recently. There was this hefty 500-pound man. He gets onto the stage with legs so big they stick together, and his face buried beneath mounds of flesh. You could see the people sniggering in the audience when he was asked if he would like to become a great singer. Nobody believed for a moment that someone who looked like him could possibly sing. But when he opened his mouth, the audience gasped. They stood up and cheered and clapped. Let's just say he sung like Pavarotti, and everyone in that audience had egg on their face. Remind me to never overlook a thing you say." We recruited an interior designer to help us furnish the house with an integrity that was complementary to the time, but allowing modern conveniences to blend in harmoniously with the look, so that a state-of-the-art kitchen didn't look out of place in our home. It was a month after we'd moved in that I started to notice strange things happening around our house. At first they were so ambiguous, so obscure, I didn't give them much credence, and put it down to a new but old house that is inclined to make noises. Let's just say at night I'd hear what sounded like banging pipes, boots walking up steps, and then there were whispers and the feeling of being watched all the time. I thought I was imagining things. Sometimes in my peripheral vision I would swear I could see a dark shadow bolting quickly past me, but I would turn around and nothing was there. My daughter Adele was a demanding child. As a first-time stay-at-home mother, I was fatigued. I thought my tiredness was catching up with me, and I was seeing and hearing things that weren't actually there. One day as I'm washing dishes in the sink, I see my daughter Adele on the swing set, which we deliberately placed under the oak tree, overlooking the kitchen, so that while I'm cleaning, baking or cooking, I can keep my beady eyes on her all the time. I stopped washing the dishes as I see my daughter swinging gently, but she's talking, laughing and giggling, as if someone is there with her, but I don't see anyone. I decide she must have an imaginary friend. I feel racked with guilt, as I realise that Adele would love a baby brother or sister for company. But despite our very best efforts, I failed to get pregnant. Maybe some things are just not meant to be. When my daughter comes back into the house, I decide to quiz her on whom she'd been talking to at the swings. Maybe tease her about it. "So who were you talking to out there by the swings?" "I was talking to Snow," says my daughter. My blood runs cold when she says this. You see, Snow was my mother's name. Her real name was Sarah Natalia Olsen, and so when she was young, people would call her Snow, and the name just stuck. But my mother had died long before Adele was even born, from a very bad viral pneumonia, and Adele had no idea her name was Snow. "What did Snow have to say?" I asked my daughter. "She says she's looking after us because of the bad thing." "What bad thing?" I ask. "The smoke wolf," says my daughter. "But she says she's going to keep him away so he can't hurt us." At this I'm not exactly sure what to think. Snow says, Mummy, you got a necklace that you're going to give me one day to wear when I'm a big, big girl. She says she wore it when she was a big girl, and you wore it too. When my daughter says this, I'm astounded. You see, not even my husband Keith knows about a diamond pendant that my mother gave me on my 21st birthday, which is to be given to my daughter on her 21st birthday. It was a pendant my mother had given her mother on her 21st birthday, and it was a family tradition that no one knew about except myself. I want you to look at these photographs, I say to my daughter, showing her some pictures that include my mother. But she doesn't recognise them until I bring out an album of my mother as a young 30-year-old woman. That's Snow. That's Snow over there, she says, pointing to the picture of a young woman smiling warmly in the camera, holding a little girl's hand, and that little girl is me. One evening when my husband was out of town for a few nights, the activity in our house stepped up a notch, possibly because he was away. I was lying in my bed in the middle of the night to hear what I can only describe as heavy combat boots walking across the landing and stopping at my door. For a while, nothing happens, but I'm holding my breath as I sit up in bed, clinging to my bed sheets tightly. There's someone outside my bedroom. Someone's broken into my house. What am I going to do? I'm frozen to the spot, unable to react, as I've been flung almost aggressively out of a deep but groggy, sleepy state into my current reality, with a hostile, rude awakening. I am desperately trying to adjust to what is transpiring around me, but I feel disorientated and confused. Surely this is a dream. Of course it is. In any moment I'll be woken up. I'll be laughing at myself for being so ridiculously silly, with an infantile, overactive imagination. My heart sinks like a heavy stone, dropping to the depths of the ocean. You see, I know that this is no dream. I'm wide awake, and this is rarely happening, and I honestly don't know how to react or what to do. It's like my brain is firing incorrectly on all its cylinders and just hopelessly sinking into the horrors of the moment, like a Portuguese man of war that is immobilized after the waves spit the opaque lump of jelly out onto the beach sand, and it squats on the shore like a big, useless, gelatinous glob. I feel like that lump of jello, held hostage by an insufferable fear. The door of my bedroom squeaks open on its own accord, while a blustering Arctic wind blows into my room, snatching the warmth away with a guzzling hunger, and causing the curtains that grace my windows to flap like the large sails on a boat. By now, I'm petrified. I want to scream. I want to say something. I want to cry out. But nothing comes out of my dry throat. The ominous footsteps walk through the room, slowly, deliberately, as if whatever it is that is moving towards me wants to scare the living hell out of me. And it's succeeding. I'm sweating profusely. The water dribbles down my back and forehead like raindrops. I shouldn't be sweating in a room that is so cold. The footsteps move up and down around my bed. Up and down, up and down, up and down. Who are you? What do you want? I say. The next thing I know is that I hear this terrible, disembodied, deep, guttural growl that is so discomposing. It literally terrifies the life out of me. It is the most ear-piercing growl that I have ever heard, that becomes a roar. And the next thing I know is that my bed begins to shake so violently and just levitates from the floor up to the ceiling. And then it drops to the ground with a loud thud. And then whatever it was that tormented me finally vanishes. I'm trembling so much, and then I get a whiff of my mother's perfume, with its distinctive floral notes that she always wore when she was alive. It's like in a second the darkness has lifted, flooded by the light of my mother's warm, congenial presence. And it's in this serene, calm atmosphere and energy that I finally fall into a deep sleep. And in my dream state, I keep seeing this woman's face. Now, I've never seen her before a day in my life. She's an attractive woman with long dark hair and auburn highlights, a long Irish face, and arresting green eyes that you don't forget in a hurry. For some reason, the prominence of the woman in my dream is so significant that even after the chaos of the night's outer worldly activity, I remember that dream with an indelible, ineffaceable recall. The following morning I wake up at about 8 o'clock, rather bewildered that my daughter Adele hadn't woken me up at the crack of dawn like she normally does. She usually gatecrashes my bed, bringing along with her an army of dolls and teddies to sleep with me and my husband. I decided she must have slept in for once in her life, and as a mother, any free time you get is a God-given gift that you snatch gratefully. The bedroom is incredibly quiet, without my husband's presence. I so wish he wasn't away for a few days, just when I need him the most. Soft shafts of morning light twinkle through the room, and that's when the full horrors of the previous night come flooding back to me, and I know that there is something ungodly in our house. This is compounded moments later, when I check on my daughter Adele. I find her lying fast asleep on her closet floor, surrounded by a heaped jumble of her own clothes. Why on earth is she sleeping in her closet? "Sweetheart," I say, sitting down on my knees and picking her up from the floor, cradling her in my arms, rocking her reassuringly. "What are you doing sleeping on the floor of the closet? Why aren't you in your bed?" "I saw him, Mummy. I saw the horrible smoky wolf that Snow told me about. The bad thing. He came into my room last night with the wind. He growled at me. But Snow came and got rid of him for me, but I was scared he was going to come back. So I hid in the closet." "Why didn't you scream or call me to help you, sweetheart?"
"'Cause I lost my voice, Mummy, and I couldn't run 'cause my legs wouldn't move, and I wet myself."
"Never you mind about that, sweetheart. We're going to sort the problem out now for you." I wasted no time going online to appeal to anyone in our area dealing with the paranormal who might be able to help me with my problem. My note read, "Dear Sir or Madam, I'm in urgent need of your help. I believe there's a demonic entity in my home. Please get back to me as soon as you can." I ventured into town and decided to look into the bookshop, and that's when I saw the woman that I'd seen in my dreams. I know she noticed I kept looking at her. Eventually she comes over to the children's section and asks me if she can help me. Back to Lorna. I can see the woman in the bookshop staring at me, looking away and staring at me again. She's barely looking at the children's books, so I walk over to her with a warm smile and ask if I may help her. "Yes, actually you can, although I don't know how, because this is going to sound exceedingly odd, but your face came into my dreams last night. I've never met you before. I've only just moved into the area, so I got a real shock when I saw you in the bookshop. I can't think what my dream could mean. You see, normally my dreams are so vague. I barely remember anything. But your face came into my dreams so vividly. I'm sorry if I was staring at you just now, but I can't fathom what's actually going on." "Where have you moved?" I asked curiously. "I've moved to the Green Acres. I don't know if you know it. It's an old colonial house. It was in a bad state of repair, but me and my husband fixed it up." I know the place. I drive past your house every day. I live further up the road. You've done an amazing job on the place, I must say. It doesn't bother you then? You're obviously not superstitious." The woman furrows her forehead. "What doesn't bother me?" she asks. "Well, the pentagram, the black candle wax, the graffiti on the wall. I think the place was used by Satan worshippers." "What?" says Meredith, covering her fingers over her mouth in shock. "That explains an awful lot. When we bought the house, part of the walls were painted over, and the living room floor was sanded down. We had no idea there was anything demonic going on in the house, but now I suppose it explains all the strange activity we've been getting." "I suppose that makes sense. The pentagram and graffiti were possibly covered up. Otherwise it could put off potential buyers. What's this about strange activity? What's been going on in your property?" When Meredith tells me what's been going on, I realise those Satan worshippers I'd encountered that inauspicious night must have invited a demon into her house. So I tell her to move in with me, and her daughter as well, for a couple of days. I don't believe it's safe for her to stay in her home alone, especially with her husband not being there, until we get in someone who knows what they're doing to clear away that negative energy. "I couldn't possibly impose on you," said Meredith. "I don't even know you. Of course you can." You can't possibly stay in that home alone, especially after what happened to you. It was 2 days later we were able to get a psychic and a priest around to the house. We made absolutely certain that Adele was staying with my husband at home. The psychic was a middle-aged woman with brown hair and steely grey eyes called Hilda. The priest, a man in his 60s, with a full head of thick grey hair. He was called Father Paul, a very serious, willowy man, with brown frightened eyes, who kept saying, "I feel a great evil in this house, a great, great evil." The poor man was trembling. I noticed he was clutching the cross around his neck so tightly, as if hanging on to it for dear life, for some kind of reassurance. Not for a moment did his mouth stop moving, as he kept praying the prayer of St. Christopher, and in one hand he was carrying the largest bottle of holy water that I've ever seen. It was as if he'd come to Merildus' home armed with precautions. I was to learn he had been thrown around by a demonic entity once, and it had taken him all his nerve and courage to come around to Merildus' house. But despite his great reservations and misgivings, he had still agreed to come. Hilda kept encouraging him, telling him to stand on his faith, and all would be well. "I'm sure it won't be as bad as last time, Father Paul," she kept saying. I remember thinking, if the priest is so nervous, how the hell can me and Meredith be expected to hold it together? And what can we expect to happen in this house clearing? Hilda became very stoic and absorbed as she made her way around the house, climbing stairs, visiting different rooms, while the priest followed behind her. I watched them walking around, and their expressions were earnestly sombre. I noticed Hilda standing in the area for a long time, where the devil worshippers had performed their blood sacrifices, and where the pentagram was carved on the floor. I could see her closing her eyes tightly. "I'm afraid you have a demon in your home. It's gaining strength," she told us. "He was brought into this house recently, after a sacrificial offering of some kind presented to Lucifer. About 3 years ago, I think. I can see an image of a pentagram on the floor, and I see a blood sacrifice of some kind being offered up to Lucifer. It would have been a lot worse if someone very powerful, with a very powerful energy, hadn't put a stop to this sacrifice, as more demons were going to be invited into your reality, into this very house. But it inadvertently was stopped by this powerful angelic intervention of some kind that scared the Satan worshippers away. The trouble is the demon in this house was conjured up before the activity was stopped, and he's dangerous. But you've had help from the other side, I see. A woman called Snow, who's been trying to keep the evil at bay. She tells me she was your mother, Meredith, and Adele's grandmother. Is that right?" "That's right," said Meredith. "My daughter has been seeing Snow quite regularly. Your grandmother Snow has tried to protect you from this dark entity in the house, a shape-shifting demon with an intense hatred. This demon would be able to take on human form when the need arises, and even emulates human voices. But this demon is not human, nor has it ever existed on the earth plane. He was invited into our reality. I see him as having a face of a wolf, but he's refusing to give me his name. There's a portal in this house that opens for a few minutes every night, and anything from beyond the veil could drift into our reality, which presents a grave problem. So we need to close that portal, and we need to bless this house and drive that demon out. It's very significant you hold it together. I know it's not easy, but you don't want to allow fear to occupy your thoughts as we do this cleansing, because demons feed off fear. Is everyone ready for the cleansing?" We all nod, while the psychic and the father repeat the prayer of St. Michael, and we're given the prayer to read out loud, and we pray it loudly throughout the house in every single room. I tried desperately not to feel any fear, but it was difficult to be strong when I had this profound sense that something dreadful would happen. My heart thundered in my chest, and I had cold chills racing down my spine. We ambled through every room in the house, avoiding the living room, where I'd personally seen the devil worshippers myself on that inauspicious night. If it hadn't been for that Bigfoot scaring them all away, we could be dealing with a greater evil in this home, and who knows how many more demons may have been conjured up and called up into our time-space. The pretentious thought left my blood curdling. The psychic intended to cleanse the living room last. Initially nothing happened at all. It was as if we were going through the motions, chanting prayers for no reason at all. I almost felt silly, but all the while I felt as if we were being watched by menacing eyes, but we saw absolutely nothing. I knew the priest was feeling the dark energy because he never stopped trembling, not even for a moment. But I admired his audacious courage because despite his dreadful fear, he refused to give up fighting this demonic stronghold. Hilda was burning sage, which she was smoking in all the corners, while white vapours of whispering smoke seemed to float through the air and physically lighten the energy, while the priest continued to sprinkle holy water in each room. Everything remained benign until we entered the living room, and that was when everything began to change. In truth, when we entered the living room, it was like we'd entered another realm, another reality, another space. The temperature was so fiercely cold, we were breathing out white mist. My fingers felt like blocks of ice, and I was shivering, while the curtains in the room were thrashing around frantically like large sails on a boat being punnelled against a heavy, feisty wind. I know it sounds crazy, but it was almost like the room was rocking like a boat, and I was feeling disorientated and nauseous from the swaying effects, almost as if I was getting seasickness. It truly felt as if we were out on the ocean. "This is a trick," says Hilda, "to make you lose focus. Keep praying. Don't be distracted." Suddenly we hear a woman's voice saying, "Meredith, please stop this. Don't do this." Meredith gasps. "Oh, my word, that's my mother's voice. That's Snow." "No, it's not," said Hilda. "It's the demon pretending to be your mother." I kid you not, we began to hear voices of our deceased loved ones we had known in life, telling us to stop the ceremony, to stop it at once. The voices even said it in unison. "Stop this! Stop this! Stop this at once!" But we continued, knowing that the demon was using the voices of our loved ones as a manipulative tactic to deceive us. Finally, when the demon was cornered, he began to growl, and the ear-piercing noise was unlike anything I've ever heard before. Low and guttural. I just wanted to run away. But even the pastor, who was wobbling like a rocking chair, remained resolutely determined to continue with the cleansing. So I tried my level best to hold it together. But the dark energy in the room was so invasive, and there was a putrid, sulphurous smell that was violently obnoxious, that smelt like death and decay. I wanted to gag and throw up, but I managed to maintain my composure. We prayed the prayer of St. Michael with even greater conviction, our words spoken with a pronounced determination. In a trice we see this black smoke whirling around and around and around, and in this black smoke we see the face of a wolf glaring at us with blazing red eyes. The tenebrous smoke spiraled into a thick mass, filtering through the window, and we saw it leaving Meredith's house until it had gone, and the house began to feel light and airy. The heaviness had lifted, and we hugged each other with such relief. "See, I told you," said Hilda to Pastor Paul. "It wasn't as bad as last time," which left me wondering what poor Pastor Paul had been through on a previous house cleansing, and I didn't want to know, so I didn't ask. Let's just say years have passed, and Meredith and I have become the very best of friends. I gather little Adele saw Snow for one last time, who told her she was leaving, as everything was safe now, and the portal had been closed. I no longer feel intimidated by Meredith's home anymore, as the demonic activity has never returned, so they didn't have to sell their house, thank goodness. I've not seen the Bigfoot I encountered, who was clearly the powerful angelic being the psychic was talking about. Here's hoping he might cross my path again one day, but hopefully in more convivial circumstances. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I'd been staying in a glamorous hotel in Seattle for a couple of days, where the new advances in dental health care were being debated at this meeting with dentists from all over the country. It was always important for me to keep abreast and au fait with modern advances in medicine, as things always progressively evolve in cutting-edge dental materials and techniques. You can easily be left behind, so staying systematically current in any medical field is significantly important. I have always been peculiarly passionate about teeth since I was a young boy. I'd make big efforts to brush even my pets' teeth fastidiously, always ensuring that they were spotlessly clean. Ostensibly, it was an empowering feeling to have given our pets the gift of great oral health throughout their lives that had impressed and somewhat bewildered our vet, who swore that our family dogs, had the cleanest teeth he had the pleasure to see. My mother would watch me brushing my dog's teeth with a measure of amusement on her face. She would say, "Why, I do believe that you're going to be a dentist when you grow up." I guess her vague passing comments just stuck like chewing gum in my mind, which was why becoming a dentist was a no-brainer to me. I do get clients terrified of dentists. It takes them all their courage to make an appointment with me. But usually they come when the pain from a tooth is so dogmatically tenacious and it's causing them such physical distress that by then they're literally begging to see me. In truth, if they'd been visiting my practices more regularly, they would have been able to avoid a great deal of pain, abscesses, root canals, and a hell of a lot of unnecessary dental work and expense. I live near Bozeman, Montana, which is about an 8-hour drive from Seattle. So when we finished the dental course, I was well on my way home so I could get back to my wife and our 2 kids by about 10 o'clock at night, if all went according to schedule, without any fortuitous hiccups along the way. I knew then that they would be fast asleep in bed, including my wife, who had learnt from experience to never wait up for me. By all accounts, when she did, she claimed she was always jinxed. On one occasion there was a multiple pile-up on the interstate, and I arrived home 5 hours later than I envisaged. If you're travelling by road, especially on a long drawn-out journey, there is always the possibility of delay. I know this firsthand from my own personal bitter experience. One journey can go smoothly. Another one can be a tiresome obstacle course, depending on weather conditions and traffic. Bozeman, Montana sits among the Gallatin Mountains, just north of the entrance to the Yellowstone National Park. Bozeman is a ranching town and is home to Montana State University. It is famous for its pristine landscape, wild indigenous animals, and a more freer way of life. Many celebrities like Michael Keaton and Jeff Bridges have claimed their piece of paradise here, in the nearby Paradise Valley, which is flanked by the Absaroka Range to the east and the Gallatin Range to the west, which is a ranch spanning more than 9,000 acres, purchased by Arthur Blank, the owner of the NFL Atlantis Falcon football team. When I was getting close to home, I decided to take the quintessential back road. I had driven this road at night on a handful of occasions before. I had spotted some interesting wildlife on this particular spot, the most spectacular being the hugest mountain lion I've ever had the privilege to see, with 3 of her magnificent cubs. I remember she was arrestingly beautiful. She stood in the middle of the road, fully aware of me and my truck. I immediately switched off the engine and continued to watch her with the light of my vehicle pinned directly on her. You could tell these cats had great night vision, as their eyes gave off this reflective yellow eyeshine. The mountain lion was not intimidated by my presence or my vehicle. She stood in the road, washing her cubs affectionately, one by one, with her large pink tongue, rather like a domestic tabby, preening its beloved kittens. She would occasionally look up at me, as she knew I was watching her. She didn't appear to mind. Then she did the craziest thing. She jumped on the hood of my Land Rover and scanned the environment, as if watching the view from a watchtower, with her cute, adorable cubs still playing on the road mischievously with each other. I think one of the small cubs was trying to attack the other's tail, as if it was a great big game. As it would seem from an early age, the desire to chase anything that moves and runs is ingrained in their predatory instincts. This is why they often warn you not to run away from a predator, as you make yourself a soft target, as they're fueled with a knee-jerk spontaneous desire to chase anything that moves. Indeed, I've seen it with our own 2 tabby cats at home. On one occasion my cat was outsmarted by a mouse, as it refused to run, and they got so bored with the little thing, they gave up the chase. At one point in time my cat actually had the mouse in his throat, and its little nose was sticking out of its mouth as if it was peering out of a hole in the wall. That must have been one hell of an experience for the poor little mite. In hindsight, maybe the mouse was frozen in terror and just couldn't move, but its savvy antics literally saved its life. After the mountain lion had scanned her environment, she then bounced off the hood of my car onto the road, and then she and her 3 little cubs followed behind her as she disappeared into the brush. I remember I was so incredibly thrilled to have had an experience like that, which I considered one of the perks of living in this prepossessing part of the world. On another occasion I saw a grizzly bear pass my field of vision on this exact same stretch of road, who looked none too pleased to have seen me. He roared at me, quickly retreated into the woodgrove to make a hasty escape, but for a brief second we had eye contact together, and that is about as close and personal to a grizzly bear I was ever going to get. Yet despite everything, I considered it a remarkable interaction. After the dental conference in Seattle, which I attend like clockwork twice a year, I found myself down that same remote stretch of road again, where I'd encountered the mountain lion. Little did I know that I would have an experience so bizarre it would scare the bejesus out of me. In truth, returning home seemed as commonplace as any other night of the week, and I was hanging on to the hope that I might see some wildlife on this stretch of road. I have always enjoyed living in the moment, so driving at night can invite opportunities for you to observe creatures you would never normally be privy to encountering, for many of them come out at night. Of course, as can be expected, there was not a solitary soul in sight, and although the road was asphalted, there were no street lights anywhere. It was late autumn. There was a feisty wind blowing, and quite an angry biting nip in the air. It was an inauspicious, bodeful night, for the moon seemed to be squatting furtively behind some murky cloud cover, and had prudently shrunk into the shadows, making the night appear all the more menacing and foreboding. I remember thinking to myself that this was a night when you didn't want to be out alone in your truck like I was. There was a mocking, taunting atmosphere from the treed embankments, as they seemed to whisper among themselves, their contemptuous boughs jiggling, their rustling leaves almost laughing provocatively. It was like they were surreptitiously watching me, with sultry, hostile eyes, making the drive for me seem hauntingly spooky. In truth, it would have been the quintessential perfect setup for a Hollywood horror movie, when any minute you would almost expect to see some robotic zombies emerging through the trees, covered in curtains of decomposing flesh, their faces white, their eyes dead. I was pondering all this when something horrifying happened, which symbolically accommodated my thoughts so articulately, almost as if I'd invited this moment to play out in my reality. I suddenly spot a woman running across the road. She was wearing a white nightdress, bespeckled with bloody droplets. She is terrified. For a second her frightened brown eyes hold mine in a stare, and her long mane of dark hair that curtains her face in limp locks looks dishevelled. My natural instinct is to press down the accelerator and to get the hell out of there. I instinctively sensed something was off about her, but I didn't know what it was. But supposing she was a manic, deranged lunatic who had butchered her husband in an angry frenzy. I knew there was a colonial house somewhere not far from here. Maybe something bad had happened there. It's amazing how your mind can presume the worst when you're on a desolate, dark, lonely country road, and when the fertile seeds of your imagination germinate, creating all kinds of crazed, warped scenarios to play out in your imagination. I then consider that the woman could be a victim of her husband's wrath, and possibly needs my help. So I need to do the right thing by her, even though my senses are screaming to leave the woman well alone and to get out of here. I realize if I don't help the woman, I'll always have to live with the remorseful, penitent regret that I may have failed a frightened woman who might be in need of my help, and my conscience persuades me reluctantly to do the right thing by her, with a vacillating, somewhat wobbling incertitude. I amble after the woman, gripped with an unwilling compunction that shackles my confidence fiercely. The woman turned around, with a demure, ambivalent look on her face, as if pondering whether she can put her faith in me or not. Then finally she nods in agreement, and gratefully follows me to the truck, obviously having decided she can trust me. I open up the truck door for her. She gives me a grateful, thankful nod, and sits down eagerly on the passenger seat next to mine. As I start up the engine, to my astonishment I realize she's wearing no shoes on her feet. How could she possibly go running around that wood grove, with bracken, sharp twigs, jutting rocks, thorns, obtrusive vegetation, that may not be very merciful to delicate feet? Let's just say, up until this point she hadn't uttered a word to me. I wasn't surprised. I envisaged she had been through some kind of trauma, I mean, the blood spots on her linen nightdress spoke of an unfortunate incident. I figured that I'd take her back home to the wife, as possibly she'd be more comfortable confiding in another woman. Besides, my wife used to be a nurse, so if anyone could help this young lady out, it would be her.
Where would you like to go? Do you need the police, or do you want me to take you home? I was thinking it might be best to take you to my house, if you'd like to talk to a woman. My wife is a very good listener. She could help you out if you need to talk with her. You're covered in blood. Did someone hurt you? Was it your husband? You can talk to me if you like. I don't bite.
The young woman does not answer my question. She stares vacantly ahead of her, almost as if I don't exist, and as if she's deaf to my very words. Looking back, I don't even think she spoke to me at all, but merely nodded. Her face was obscured by her long dark hair, that conveniently curtained it, possibly on purpose, I thought. Maybe she was timorously shy, and hiding behind her hair. I do recall that her scared brown eyes were terrified. So I decide I'd take her to my home. My wife can talk to her. I discern she doesn't want to talk to me, and I can understand that. For a fleeting second my eyes dart down to her feet, and they're no longer there. But I see the corner of her nightdress, but there's no feet, no legs. In that moment I'm filled with a discomposing terror. What the hell, I think? I saw her feet only a moment ago. There are no words to describe the icy Arctic chill that meandered down my spine in that moment. I thought I was losing it. It had never occurred to me that there was anything outer-worldly or idiosyncratic about this woman. She seemed like the girl next door, only covered in blood and very afraid. I then glanced up at her face and discovered to my horror that she's not even in my car. I'm now confounded. Where on earth did she go? She was here a moment ago. Now she's gone. I would have heard her if she'd got out of the car. I stopped the car, climb out of my car seat, closing the door behind me, skimming the landscape with my eyes, using the torch that I always carry with me. I look around. I see a flash of her white gown rushing into the wood grove. She glances over her shoulders back at me, her eyes filled with terror. In that sobering moment, I know she's a ghost. In every fibre of my being. She has to be. There is no plausible explanation for what has just transpired. When I returned to the truck, I felt the area where she'd been sitting, and it was like touching an ice block, while my seat remained lovely and warm. In that moment, I am so freaked out that I drive home like a bat out of hell. My wife is fast asleep upstairs when I open the front door, trying to be discreet. I amble over to the bar, where I pour myself a stiff drink to compose my now rattled nerves. Did I really see that? My body is shaking like a leaf. Unbeknown to me, my wife had heard the sound of my car purring down the drive. She'd heard me park in the parking bay and switch off the engine. So she left her bedroom, dashed down the sweeping staircase in search of me, to find out how the dental conference went. She pads into the bar so quietly that I didn't see her there. And of course she's wearing a white nightgown. What are the chances of that? And when I see her in my peripheral vision, I nearly jump out of my skin, I'm so alarmed. I let out a loud shriek. I thought the strange woman in white had followed me home. "What the hell is going on?" says my wife, looking at me through wide, earnest eyes. "Why are you drinking stiff alcohol? Why are you screaming at me? And why the hell are you shaking so much?" "You scared the hell out of me. You gave me the fright of my life, pouncing on me like that." "Oh dear, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you. What's going on? Why do you look so freaked out? You've gone as white as a sheet."
"I've only just gone and seen a ghost on the back road, where I once saw that mountain lion, do you remember, and her cubs? The very same stretch of road, not far from that colonial home. I always see something a little idiosyncratic on the road, but a ghost I didn't expect to see. And can you believe it? I picked her up to give her a lift." "What?" says my wife, cradling her hand over her mouth in astonishment. "Where? When? How do you know it was a ghost?"
I proceed to tell my wife my incredulous story, and she wasn't best pleased with me, I have to say. "What the hell is wrong with you? Why would you stop for a woman like that? Supposing there was something seriously wrong with her. You were an isolated stretch of road, for goodness sake. Thanks a bunch for thinking you could bring a woman like that home to me. I wish to God you wouldn't drive home that way. Anything could be out there. You hear stories of strange creatures, odd sightings that people can't explain." Of course, I knew my wife was right. She usually was about most things. But in the days and weeks that followed, instead of feeling a reluctance about going the back way again, I was now more curious than ever about what I'd encountered that night, and I pondered a great deal about the ghost I'd seen, and wondered about her story. Little did I know that answers would be forthcoming sooner than I imagined. One night me and my wife had been invited to dinner with the very couple who lived in the colonial house not far from that stretch of road where I encountered the woman in white. My wife made friends with a young woman called Monica who lived there, as my son Blake was 4 at the time and was at preschool, or nursery school if you like, with her son Richard. It would seem the two women had struck up an unlikely friendship. "Oh, you really must come to my house for dinner," she told my wife. "We live in an old colonial house, saturated with such a rich history." She lowered her voice and whispered, "It's haunted, you know." "And that doesn't bother you?" my wife had asked her incredulously. "Oh, heavens no. I don't worry about things like that. I love to live in a place with a rich, vibrant history. It gives the place character, charm, personality. From the first moment I saw the house, I had to have it. Of course, my husband wasn't terribly pleased. He couldn't stand the place. He said it made him feel uneasy. Liam prefers more modern ranch-style homes, you see. He thinks the colonial architecture is dated. I completely disagree. It's modern architecture that dates. But classic buildings, they're timeless. I reminded my husband that happy wife means happy life. I always bring that up when I want to get my way with him. It usually works, because it's true. Let's just say for a while he huffed and puffed about it. Took me to see some more modern ranch-style homes, in the hope that I'd fall in love with a more modern home. But my husband, as usual, underestimated me. And when I visited those locations, I wanted the colonial all the more. Indeed, it made me realise that I just had to have it, as all the other houses seemed so flat, rather like champagne without the sparkle or fizz. My husband got the fright of his life when the estate agent phoned him up and said, "Sir, I'm very glad to inform you that your offer on the colonial has been accepted." "You didn't, did you?" my wife gasped. "Behind your husband's back? Oh, my word! If it was my husband, he'd have kittens if I made a huge decision like that, without his agreement." "Well, I knew I had to do it," Monica explains. "My husband can be slow to make up his mind about things, you see. He's a Libra, you know, always wavering and vacillating about whether to do this or that. Do you know he seemed kind of relieved that the decision had been taken out of his hands?" "Maybe that's why he's attracted to you," says my wife. "Maybe your decisiveness means things are a lot easier for him." "I never thought of it like that," says Monica, "but you might just be right. Did the estate agent tell you your house was haunted when you bought it?" "Are you kidding? Of course not. At the time I didn't believe in ghosts anyway, but I've changed my mind about that now." "But how do you know your house is haunted?" "Because my husband has seen the ghost a couple of times. We often hear feet walking up and down the landing, and sometimes I hear raised voices, but nothing is ever there. Let's just say we've had some bizarre experiences at my home. One time when me and my husband were sitting in the bar, having drinks, a wine glass lifted off the bar on its own accord. It levitated at about half a foot above the table, and then went crashing across the wall, where it shattered into hundreds of pieces, which scattered around the room everywhere. It made quite a startling noise, I hasten to say. At the time we had company, a couple of guests for dinner actually, who had popped to see us from Seattle. They had known my husband from his university days. They were the kind of couple that just would not leave. They nattered on and on and on, and me and Liam, we were just bored to death. You know those kind of people that just won't ever go. I mean, there's only so long you can hear someone drone on and on about car batteries. In truth, I never knew there was so much to say about the matter until I met the couple, who seemed to find the subject quite riveting. The husband was a mechanic. We were actually thinking, would they ever shut up about car batteries? Suffice to say, after the glass is flung at the bar, that couple fled so fast from our home and have never been back since. It's almost as if the ghost was getting them to leave on our account. I almost suspect that happened as Liam pointed out that maybe the ghost was getting bored too. I'll never forget that woman's face when she suddenly claimed that it was terribly late and they should get back. They told us not to see them out, and boy did they hightail it out of the house so fast, as if terrified that the entity in our home would be after them. I've never seen anyone leave our premises in such haste. It was hilarious. It may have been good to get rid of dull guests that had outstayed their welcome, but still it's scary to have a glass flung from the bar at a wall in front of you like that. It would freak me out if that happened to me, says my wife. Oh dear, I hope I haven't put you off coming to dinner. I assure you, all of our other dinner parties have gone without a hitch. Of course I'm not put off. I'm intrigued, my wife had said. I had never met Monica, nor had I met her husband Liam. At the time, my wife had not mentioned the fact that Monica claimed her house was haunted. I remember when I realised her house was the renovated old colonial, on the back road where I'd seen the ghost in white. I was more than a little stunned about the coincidence, but I actually gave the matter no further thought. How could I have known that the old colonial house and the ghost were unequivocally connected? I was in for the surprise of my life. Suffice to say, Monica and her husband Liam were a very likeable couple. I could see why my wife connected so much with Monica. She was an easygoing, fun-loving person with a fabulous sense of humour, while her husband Liam was more reticent, the retiring type, but nevertheless a very charming gentleman, who was quite eccentric. He wore a tweed jacket, a red cravat around his neck. He had curly brown hair, bushy eyebrows that seriously needed grooming, and long sideburns, which gave him an old-fashioned, poetic kind of look. I half expected him to say he was a writer or a poet, but it turned out he was an engineer. I wasn't surprised at all to see that the couple had a library, with floor-to-ceiling shelves with leather-bound books, some of them easily over 100 years old, while Monica had shelves of cookery books that were so ancient they were long since out of date. She claimed she thoroughly enjoyed recreating some of those old 1800 recipes. The house, which had been renovated 5 years prior, was absolutely stunning. I could almost certainly see why Monica had fallen in love with the place. By contrast, I felt our modern double-storey farmhouse where we lived seemed more pedestrian, nondescript, rather bland, whereas the Kalinsky household felt as if it was steeped in a rich history. It felt like you were being swept back to another time. I was almost envious, although not quite. I did think that wandering down the airy corridors at night, with those large opulent rooms with their high ceilings and dramatically grandiose chandeliers, could be more than a little intimidating. And being in a historic house that was so large when you're alone would not be a comfortable experience, especially if you were to hear strange sounds at night. Monica was an exceptional hostess who knew how to cook. Her table was laid superbly, so superbly in fact that the glasses actually twinkled and gleamed. The silverware shone like a new pin. Flowers accentuated the table with their pretty pastel shades, and to add to the cosy, inviting ambience, there was a fire crackling away happily in the hearth, which was incredibly pleasant, as the weather had turned. Many trees had lost their leaves, and there was a definite chill in the air. I wasn't surprised to learn that in the 90s Monica had been to a finishing school in Berkshire, in the United Kingdom, called Wingfield Place, where she'd learnt cordon bleu cooking and Constance Spry flower arranging. It was a huge white manor house that accommodated the live-in students there, and was the kind of place young women went to learn the art of becoming the perfect wife. It would seem in the good old days many young women from affluent households were expected to marry into wealth. I gather Monica was engaged to a prominent military man from Sandhurst Military Academy when she met Liam, her husband, in a bar in Windsor, and she was happy to meet up with the only other American in the entire pub, Lo and behold, they both discovered they'd grown up living streets apart from each other in Seattle, which seemed rather weird when they'd been so close but so far growing up. It was serendipitous, and after Monica met Liam, they became inseparable. Nowadays, finishing schools I don't believe exist anymore. But let's just say Monica was a domestic goddess, and her food would rival any first-class restaurant. I think my wife felt rather intimidated by what a superb hostess Monica was. But she immediately put my wife at ease and told her to stop being ridiculous. If you had been to finishing school, you'd also be an amazing cook. I'll tell you what, I'll give you some pointers. My wife's face lit up like a Christmas tree. Seriously, she asked. Of course, I wouldn't have it any other way. Besides, it'll be fun to cook together. We'll have a blast. It wasn't long before my wife piped. Guess what, sweetheart? Monica was telling me the house here that they have is haunted. At this astonishing revelation, my blood naturally turns cold. I realise in that moment that the ghost that haunts this colonial house is the very same ghost I encountered that inauspicious night when I returned home from the dental conference, the ghost that I actually gave a lift to. My wife realises that the story connects. She gives me an incredulous look as if to say, "My God, you've seen the very same ghost." "Tell them the story, Liam. Don't leave anything out." "It's an incredible story," says Monica excitedly. "You've got to hear this. Believe me, you can't make the stuff up. It goes from the weird to the idiosyncratic. You're not going to believe this story." We are on the cheese course of the meal, which is served the traditional French way before the dessert, and Liam reaches for a cracker, covering it with a gooey slice of brie, and takes a bite. He wipes a few crumbs away from his moustache, while all eyes remain locked on him. For a moment I feel like a child, sitting by a crackling fire, waiting for my grandfather to tell me a remarkable story. I'm champing at the bit to hear it. My heart is pounding in my chest, but there's no reason to get my adrenaline coursing through my veins like this, in a benign, benevolent, cosy environment. But the very mention of the girl in white, the memory of that night when I witnessed her running through the woodgrove, has already caused my hands to start sweating. "Go on," says Monica. "Don't keep our guests in suspense. Tell them the story." "Very well," says Liam. "Where to begin? It was autumn, about the same time of year as it is now. The leaves were changing. The trees looked quite marvellous. For me personally, I love the colour at this time of year. I happened to be drinking a glass of sherry on the back porch. It's a ritual of mine after a long, hard day at the office. I was looking out over the woodgrove, where the sun was setting over the valley. It wasn't even dark then, but I do recall thinking how magnificent it all was, and how I wished I could paint this wonderful view, transfer this transfixing beauty to canvas, capture this near-perfect moment." "You mean this happened during the day?" gasps my wife. "I would say it was late afternoon, early evening," said Liam. "The sun was beginning to set. That was when I saw her. The young lady. I'm not actually sure how old she was. Possibly 23 or 4. I'm not very good with age. But she was young. She had some unfortunate-looking blood specks all over her nightgown or white smock, if you like, although I wasn't sure if they belonged to her or not. But she looked desperately afraid, as if she was running from something or someone. But she was dashing through the woodgrove at a mighty speed, the one that finally meets the back road over there." "But she looked like she was running from something?" asked my wife. "Exactly. She seemed desperately afraid, kept glancing back at the house. I remember hearing a man's voice that sounded like a growl, but I never saw anyone. Of course I didn't know who the hell the girl was, and what she was doing running on our lawn towards the woodgrove. But she looked as real as you and I. I'd no reason to suspect she was a ghost. Well, not then. Anyway, I start running after her to ask her if she needs my help. But she just ignores me. I'm saying, 'Please, young lady, let me help you.' Then I hear this man's raspy breath and feet running past me. But I see nothing. But when I look back at the young girl again, I see she has no legs and feet. It would seem her legs had vanished. It was like her dress and her body were levitating above the ground.
Oh, it freaked me out. So in a fit of frenzied fear, I hightailed it as fast as I could through the forest to get back to the house. I realized that this woman was a ghost. I'm so shocked, so disorientated, that like a great big oafish klutz, I don't look where I'm going. I'm so blindsighted, so intent on getting away as fast as I can, that I trip over a large stone jutting through the earth. I almost levitate myself for a moment, falling so violently hard onto the ground with a mighty thud. I hear the horrifying crack that tells me at once I've broken a bone. Oh, the pain I felt was excruciating. I even cry out, it's so agonizing. My wife has no clue where I am at this point. I'm in the woodgrove, I'm struggling to get up, and my ankle is killing me. The pain is so bad. It looks really grim. It's contorted and disfigured, almost hanging precariously off the ankle, my foot I mean. It looks deformed. There's no way I can walk on this leg. And the weirdest thing happens then. I'm still on the ground, trying to scramble to my feet. I'm on my hands and knees, overcome with the weirdest sensation that I'm not alone, that I'm being watched for some reason. For a moment that panicking feeling bubbles over me. I feel cornered, but not by a wild animal, by a ghost. My first thought is that that girl in white is coming after me. Then I hear these heavy feet walking over to me, thumping the ground like a booming drum. I hear crackles of leaf litter, the sound of snapping twigs, and then I see it. I had no idea what this thing was, but it was astonishingly human. It must have been about 7 to 8 foot tall, 600 to 700 pounds, I can't be sure. But she was definitely female, because she had breasts. She was covered from head to toe in long, dark, flowing hair, the colour of a black bear. She had quite a leathery grey skin, a furrowed, wrinkled forehead, and these deep-set dark eyes that were the colour of treacle. But they were kind, very intelligent. I would say she was very concerned about me. The creature was very big. Gargantuan shoulders, I have to say. Body solidly muscular. She had a dead squirrel hanging loosely over her shoulders, which I imagine she was planning to eat later as a tasty snack. I should have been petrified, but for a moment I'm rather confused and disorientated. I've just observed this outlandish ghost. I didn't expect to see that. Now I've had a nasty fall, broken my ankle, and now I'm seeing a human-like creature with primate-like influences dashing over to me in the woodgrove. Things could not get more enigmatic. I'm entitled to think that I'm either daydreaming, or I've slammed my head so hard during a fall that I'm now delirious and hallucinating. Or more to the point, did I have more than one shot of sherry, and I'm so drunk I'm seeing things that aren't actually there? The truth was I knew I wasn't dreaming, nor had I drunk too much, nor was I delirious. This creature was real. She bends down and looks at my ankle, and her face registers astonishment. She can't believe my break. She examines my foot that's attached to my ankle and scratches her head in bewilderment. I'm still wincing in pain. She sees I'm hurting, and it troubles her greatly. She wants to fix my problem for me, but my foot, she realizes, is not a problem that she can resolve. I imagine with her strong, robust, powerful bones, injuries like mine are hard for her to even imagine could exist. I try to stagger to my feet, but I can't. I point towards my house. "Do you think you can give me a hand?" I say to her. I can't believe I'm asking this huge creature to help me. But what I can't believe even more is she understands what I'm saying, even though she doesn't speak a word of English. I know I can trust her. I can sense that she's very, very kind. She immediately picks me up in her arms. She carries me to my front porch, where she puts me on the very chair I sit to watch the sunset in the evenings. And that's when I realize that although I have never seen her before, she is well acquainted with all my quirky ways. She knows where I sit in the late afternoon. She probably knows my wife very well. In a strange way, knowing this gives me a measure of comfort, for this creature has my back. She stands there for a moment, as if she's expecting me to ask her to do something else for me. But I thank her. She nods, and she glides away, and boy does she move so gracefully. I'm confounded by that, I have to say. I found out later that what I'd observed was a Bigfoot.
"You're kidding," said my wife. "You saw a Bigfoot and a ghost in the same day. Did you ever see them again?"
I did, as it happens. When my ankle was fixed and I was walking around the wood grove, I saw this head peering at me from behind a tree, and it was the Bigfoot. She moved away from the tree, standing only 3 feet away from me. She looked on me as if I was a great old friend of hers. She was genuinely thrilled to see me. I can't say I know many human beings that are that happy to see me when I cross their path, but this Bigfoot genuinely was. She was so excited to make my acquaintance again, as if I'd been off planet for a decade. She whistled when she saw me, pointed at my ankle, slapped me on the back very gently as if to say, "I'm so pleased you're better." She bent down on her hands and knees to examine my ankle very carefully. She was stroking it. She seemed absolutely mystified. It was like she was saying, "How could you fix an injury that was so distorted, so misshapen?" I told her I had an operation. Not that I could expect her to understand what that was about. But I explained I went under the knife, and she listened to me, as if she understood every word I was saying. She watched my eyes, and it was as if she was reading my thoughts. I sensed she understood everything, although whether she did I don't know. But she walked with me for a long while through the wood grove, and then I heard another whistle. I sensed that was her partner. She tapped me on the shoulders, nodded at me, and glided away. I remember thinking what a beautiful creature she was. So human, so emotionally intelligent, so generous. I was actually sad when she left my side. I don't mind admitting that to you. It was riveting being in her company, like I sensed she thoroughly enjoyed being with me. As for the ghost of the girl, I did see her wandering across the lawn another evening, and you bet your cotton socks I didn't go chasing after her in the wood grove again. I don't know why I was so frightened by her, but her smock covered in blood droplets was more than a little disturbing for me.
"We found out who the ghost was, didn't we?" said Monica. "You see, after Liam had that weird experience, I checked out the history of the house out of interest. What I learnt was a young woman lived here with her brother. By all accounts, they were close siblings. No one knows what the spat was about, but she punched her brother in the nose, and he spouted blood all over her nightdress and was furious with her. He went running after her because she was running away, across the lawn to the wood grove. When he found his sister, he punched her so violently hard, unaware of his own strength. He was mortified to discover that his sister wouldn't wake up after he'd hit her. He claimed he cradled her body for ages and sobbed, crying out, "Oh my God, what have I done? What have I done? Beatrix, please wake up." When he realized his sister was dead, he surreptitiously buried her in the wood grove, and the family issued a missing persons report, as she'd disappeared off the face of the earth, and no one knew what had happened to her. I gather he was never the same after her fortuitous demise, as he probably wrestled with guilt over what had transpired all his life. It was only on his deathbed he told his family what had happened, so that they could actually exhume his sister's bones and bury her in the family plot next to him. He wanted to be buried with her. "That's so sad," says my wife. "That's why men should never ever hit women. They don't know their own power. We're the weaker sex, much more fragile than a man is. The poor brother must have been so shocked that a mere punch had killed his sister like that. It's quite frightening when you think about it. I think when my husband saw the girl in the white smock, it was almost a reenactment of the dreadful day when she ran from her brother, being played out in our time-space." "Wow, I see why you're not bothered by the haunting. The ghosts here are benign. They mean you no harm. They're part of the rich fabric of the home," says my wife. "That's exactly how I feel," says Monica. "I like to think she's here in the house with us, and her brother too. They were a very nice family." Let's just say I decided not to share my story about my account with the lady in white. I'm not sure why, but it didn't feel right somehow. As for my wife and Monica, they're the best of friends all these years later.
And Monica was true to her promise. She taught my wife to become an incredible cook. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, it had been a hard, cruel day, when it felt as if the entire world was conspiring against me. I think we've all had days like that, when nothing appears to go right, and it's hard not to take it personally. I'd woken up that morning to my mother throwing ice-cold water over my face. "Mum, stop it! Stop it! Don't do that!" I cried in protest. "What are you doing?" The freezing water had jolted my sleeping body out of its slumber with a rude awakening, and icy cold water was trickling down my face, onto my pyjamas, and down my chest. My mother is standing there, with her hands on her hips, staring at me indignantly. "Frida, how many times have I told you to wake up? But you never ever listen, do you?" I groaned. "Mum, I'm tired." "So we all are tired, Frida. But unlike you, we push ourselves up out of our beds. It's called having self-discipline. Good job you're not in the army. That's what I can say. You'd be doing 1,000 push-ups by now for failing to get up. Look at the time it is," she says, glancing at her watch. "You've got 10 minutes, Frida. If you don't hurry up, you'll miss your lift club. Mrs. Montgomery will be here in any second, and you know how stroppy she gets if you keep her waiting. That woman can be explosive if you rub her up the wrong way. Believe me, I know." "Where is Rolf?" I asked my mother. "Your sensible brother has been up for ages, unlike you. He's downstairs eating his breakfast in the kitchen, like you should have been doing a long time ago if you weren't so completely complacent. If you must know, I made your absolute favourite this morning, blueberry pancakes. You've missed out, but your lunchbox is already prepared. It's in the kitchen. You'll only be able to eat it at morning break. Now hurry up. Your father's at work already, and the dog walker has already picked up Jinxie for his morning walk. You're the only one lagging behind, procrastinating, dawdling as usual, holding everybody up with your slackness. It's a pity they don't give prizes for sloth. You'd get the gold star, that's for sure. Don't be so mean, Mummy. I'm not that bad. Get a move on then." My family live in the rather enchanting, quaint old coal mining town of Roslyn, dappled in the layers of a rich, creamy history. Kittitas County is located in the Cascades, 80 miles from Seattle, which is approximately an hour and a half away by car. It's nestled in the foothills of the Snoqualmie Mountains and is a small, congenial place to live, where people are friendly and are on first-name terms with each other. The hit television series Northern Exposure was actually filmed here to replicate the exterior scenes of a fictional town in Alaska called Sisley. I groan and quickly snatch my school dress off a hanger, and I put it on as fast as I can. I brush my hair, pulling it back from my face in a neat ponytail, fastened together with a navy ribbon. I can't find my black leather shoes anywhere. I begin to panic as I start to frantically search for them. Where are they? I was sure I'd put them by my bed. "Mum, I can't find my shoes anywhere." "Oh, for goodness sake, Frida. I need this like a hole in my head this morning. Where did you last put them?" My mother begins to frantically help me search for them, in vain, as she looks under beds, rifles through cupboards, peers behind curtains and doors, rummages through drawers, and even feels behind the lining of the sofas and upholstered chairs in the house. But they're nowhere to be found. My mother is exasperated, her pretty face furrowed with worry lines. "Honestly, Frida, I'm a nervous wreck. Why do you keep doing this to me? None of this would ever happen if you were prudently punctual like your brother Rolf, and would actually get up in time. Oh, I could live without all this unnecessary stress, this chaotic upheaval. This sort of thing happens when you're disorganized. I want you to think. Where did you actually have them last?" "Well, when I came back from school yesterday. That's when I had them." "But where did you take your shoes off?" "In my bedroom, by the side of my bed." "Well, that's very strange, Frida, because they can't just go walkabout like that, can they? Shoes don't actually have legs and feet like we do." All of a sudden we hear Mrs. Montgomery pounding loudly at the front door and ringing the bell incessantly.
so it roars through the house intrusively, like an ungodly ambulance siren that won't shut up. My mother goes down to speak to the irate woman, who is looking less than thrilled to be kept waiting. "Sorry, Nora," my mother said to Mrs. Montgomery. "It's Frida. She can't find her shoes anywhere. They've completely disappeared off the face of the planet. I could write a book on how many times Frida's shoes vanish." Mrs. Montgomery has about as much humour as an aggrieved Rottweiler dog. Her nostrils are flaring, her eyelashes twitching rather too fast. If she was a dragon, she would be breathing out fire. She finds my mother's comical comments to be in poor taste. "What's wrong with your daughter? It's always Frida that holds everybody up. Why am I not surprised about this? Frida's up to her old tricks again. If she was a car on the road, she'd be causing major traffic jams. That girl's got a rusty engine on her. If she doesn't hurry up, I'm going without her. I'm not going to allow those poor children in the car to be late for school on her account. It's not fair on them. I'll give her 2 minutes, and that's being decent." My brother Rolf climbs out of Mrs. Montgomery's car, looking nonplussed. "What's going on, Mum? Why is Frida keeping us waiting? What's the hold-up this time?" "Frida can't find her shoes. We've searched absolutely everywhere for them. You don't happen to know where they are, do you, Rolf?" "I saw Jinxie with one of her shoes yesterday. He was trotting down the stairs with a shoe in his mouth." "Oh, Ralph, why didn't you say something? And furthermore, stop Jinxie," my mother scolds. "You know what he's like when he gets his teeth into anything. That's why I buy him those pig snouts and hooves to chew on, to keep him distracted." She dashes quickly to Jinxie's basket. I found them, and discovers both shoes tucked behind the folds of the doggy blanket. But one of them has been chewed up so badly I can't wear it, as the rubber heel has been torn away from the leather. "Look at this shoe," says my mother gingerly. "It's ruined. I wish to goodness when you took your shoes off, Frida, you'd put them away in your cupboard and close the closet door behind you. Why is being tidy to the two of you kids like a foreign language? Jinxie will chew anything if he gets a chance. You know he will. That dog has an incessant desire to get his teeth into absolutely everything. Remember when he completely ripped up the sofa? We came home to find the entire living room covered in foam. Jinxie looked totally nonchalant about what he'd done. It was as if butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. He couldn't understand why we were so grievously upset." My mother groans. "Another expense I could have avoided. You better put on a pair of sneakers. You can't wear these to school." I look appalled. The last thing I want to do is to stick out like a sore thumb at school, draw unwanted attention to myself. "Mum, I can't wear sneakers to school. Everybody will be staring at me. Please can't I stay at home, just for today, until you buy me another pair of school shoes?" "No, you can't. You're going to school, and you'll wear your sneakers. Is that understood?" "Yes, Mummy," I say, knowing that I can't argue against the Berlin Wall that is closing in on me. And when my mother puts up any resistance, I learnt a long time ago not to fight back. It's a losing battle. I groan, throwing my satchel over my shoulders reluctantly, resigned to the humiliating fact that I'll be the only one in school today, wearing bright orange sneakers. Everybody will be staring at me, and some people might be cruel enough to snigger. If only my sneakers were white, they wouldn't be so conspicuous, but this obtrusive orange stands out offensively against my school uniform. But I was the one that insisted on an orange pair of sneakers. I thought they looked hip. Now I'm beginning to regret that impromptu decision. I reluctantly climb into the car. Mrs. Montgomery's car always smells of leather, to be greeted by a tense atmosphere. She presses down the accelerator with a grievous punch, so that the car almost screeches as it swerves down the long road where we live. She's shaking her head indignantly, glancing at me through the visor mirror, with looks that could kill. "Frida, you're going to have to get your act together. You can't keep everybody waiting like this. I'm sorry. It's not acceptable." "Why are you always so late?" pipes Mrs. Montgomery's goody two-shoes daughter Amelia, who's glaring at me from the front seat as she chews her gum. "I'm never late, am I, Mummy?"
No, you're not, dear. You're never late. You never let your mummy down. But I do wish you'd get rid of that ghastly chewing gum. It's a disgusting habit. Daddy says that chewing gum activates the saliva so you protect your teeth from tooth decay. Your daddy says a lot of things, Amelia, and I don't actually agree with them all. He says dogs are frightened of the dark, so they can't sleep outdoors. I've never heard anything so ridiculous in my life. Look at the coyotes. They all live outside very well, thank you very much. He says that, Mummy, because he doesn't want you to let the dog sleep outside. He says it's cruel. I rummaged through my rucksack, suddenly remembered that I'd left my lunch behind on the kitchen table. Mrs. Montgomery, I'm so sorry, but do you mind if we go back quickly to get my lunchbox? I left it at home. Typical, says my brother. You'll lose your head, Frida, if you're not careful. There are protests in the back of the car from all the young passengers, as all the members of our lift club, Louise, Chantel, Amelia, Robert and Peter, are not pleased with me. Please, Mrs. Montgomery, don't go back, they say. We don't want to get into trouble for being late, just because of Frida. I'm sorry, Frida, says Mrs. Montgomery, but I'm not going back to pick up your lunch for you. I've never known anyone so disorganised, so incredibly forgetful. I'll tell you what, I'll give you money for the tuck shop, but mind you pay me back. But that's not fair, Mummy. You're giving Frida money for the tuck shop, so she can have hot dogs and potato chips while we eat cold sandwiches. And I didn't forget my lunch behind, like she did. I'd leave my lunch behind every day on purpose if it meant I could get money for the tuck shop. You can have some money for the tuck shop tomorrow, says Mrs. Montgomery to her daughter. But you know I don't approve of your eating too many hot dogs and potato chips. You'll break out in zits all over your face, and we can't have that. If that wasn't a bad enough start to the day, it only got worse as we ambled off to school. I could see my boyfriend Luke Thornby just scuttling past me like a rabbit darting to its burrow, cunningly pretending not to see me at all. He was deliberately ignoring me. Normally he'd come over to my locker and greet me enthusiastically, and we would garrulously chatter together about everything and nothing. But not this morning. It really hurt that he was avoiding me like this, as if I didn't even exist. "Luke!" I call after him. "Luke!" But he never turned around, not even once. He walked away, talking and laughing, with his two best friends, Michael and Byron, who were giving me furtive glances. Luke was acting as if he'd never heard me. What the heck was going on? I felt grievously hurt, but more than feeling hurt, I felt offended and angry. My blood was boiling with indignation. How dare he ignore me like that? Later that morning, things got worse. I found myself unfortunate enough to be sitting in the headmistress's office. Mrs. Patchett was a middle-aged woman, with curly grey hair, who always wore a very serious expression on her face. I was trembling in the chair when she asked me to sit down. Meeting up with Mrs. Patchett in her office was worse than visiting the dentist any day of the week. Every kid in our school knew that if you ended up in Mrs. Patchett's office, you were in heaps of trouble. "Well, what have you got to say for yourself, young lady? I pride myself on deportment in this school, and I won't tolerate sloppy dress. Why are you wearing the most ghastly orange sneakers? And where on earth are your school shoes? Do you realise how unsightly it looks to wear sneakers with your school uniform? And that orange colour is very, very unsightly." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Patchett, but my dog chewed up my school shoes, so I had nothing to wear." "It sounds like a very convenient excuse to me. And even if it is true, I suggest that you're more responsible, Frida. You should put your shoes away in the closet. Then your dog won't get to them. I'll let you wear your sneakers just this once, but tomorrow, if you're not wearing the correct school shoes, I'll send you home. There's another thing I'm rather concerned about, Frida. Many of the teachers say that you're often turning in your homework late. I hasten to say, Frida, it's incredible how everybody else in the school is able to complete their homework on time, but not you. I believe you even asked your teacher, Mrs. Yates, for a rain check. Now, I want to say this, Frida. We don't give anyone rain checks in this school. Do you understand? If we want your homework completed that evening, that's what we expect from you. We don't make special allowances under any circumstances, unless, of course, they're exceptional. I'm sorry, Mrs. Patchett. It won't happen again. Good. I'm very glad to hear that, Frida. And by the way, your mother came by. She dropped off your lunchbox, says Mrs. Patchett, handing it over to me. It seems to me, Frida, that you're becoming increasingly forgetful. You need to pull up your socks, young lady. Yes, Mrs. Patchett. If things couldn't get any worse, they did. It was lunchtime. I went to search for my boyfriend Luke, and I saw him walking along side by side with Eloise Parker. Are you kidding me? Eloise Parker! My heart sank. I was burning with jealousy. Luke was my first boyfriend. I'd known him for years and years. We'd grown up together. What was she doing with him? And why was Luke vindictively ignoring me like this? He hadn't even acknowledged me all day. Why was he being so spitefully mean, so cold, so callously heartless? I didn't know how he could even like Eloise. She was a toffee-nosed, stuck-up, condescending brat who was in my class at school, always sucking up to the teachers, buying them flowers, telling them how lovely they looked, when I knew she didn't mean a word of it. She just wanted the teachers to like her. It was blindingly obvious. Oh, this old thing, the teacher would say. I've had it for years and years. Thanks, Eloise. It's a very kind thing of you to say. I'm very pleased you like it. You're a very complimentary young lady. I clandestinely follow Eloise and Luke to the bottom of the school playground, opposite the tennis courts, where they sit together on a bench as they eat their packed lunches, as if butter wouldn't melt in their mouths. Are you kidding me? Has Luke got absolutely no shame? They're talking and laughing together, while Luke spontaneously kisses Eloise on the cheek. She blushes bright red and giggles. I can't take it any more. I'm burning with an incandescent rage, my body trembling and shaking involuntarily with an unfathomable madness. I feel a fury rising up inside of me, and I march over to my boyfriend belligerently, like an elephant in a china shop, all guns blazing, nostrils flaring, eyes glaring, sparking and spitting like a roaring fire. What's going on here, Luke? This looks very nice and cosy, doesn't it? You and Eloise parked together on a bench, eating your lunch. Luke looks at me. He flushes a bright red colour, as if he's been caught with his pants down. We're just having lunch together, Frida. What's your problem? The problem is, Luke, you're supposed to be my boyfriend, in case you've forgotten about that. Why are you cheating on me? You shouldn't be having lunch with another girl. I saw you kiss Eloise on the cheek. I'm not your boyfriend anymore, Frida. Eloise and I are together now. So you were too gormless to break up with me, is that it? You just chose to ignore me? That's rich. You know what, Luke? I'm glad it's over between us, 'cause you're the biggest loser on the entire planet. And if I never ever see you again, I'll be very, very happy. Move on, Frida. We're not together anymore. Get over it. Oh, don't worry about that, Luke. I'm so over you, I say, trying to hide the tears that are filling my eyes. Don't you ever come near my house again on the weekend to play music with me, 'cause you're not welcome. And at that, I thunder away. When I returned home from school that afternoon, I was distressed to have been dumped by Luke, who lived further down the road from me, in the pink symmetrical-sized farmhouse with its grey slate roof. We'd played together for years since we were toddlers. Our mothers had been, and still were, the very best of friends. We had been inseparable for years. As in our small town, people can become like extended members of your own family. Even our foolish parents had hedged a bet that one day me and Luke would get married, as we connected so well together and were inseparable. Adults could be so foolish. I mean, what did they actually know? They couldn't predict the future. And as far as I was concerned, it was well and truly over between Luke and myself. and I never wanted to see him again as long as I lived, and I meant every single word of it. I was relieved to see my mother had brought me a brand new pair of black leather school shoes. At least I wouldn't get into trouble at school with Mrs. Patchett in the morning, who I don't doubt would send me home in a heartbeat if I arrived at school again with orange sneakers. She didn't suffer fools gladly, that woman. "What's wrong with you?" asks my brother when we returned home after being dropped off by Mrs. Montgomery. "You were very quiet in the car ride home. You never said a single word. You're normally so chatty." "I didn't feel like talking," I say. My brother studies me studiously. He knows something's up. My brother is very perceptive. Unfortunately, he notices my red eyes. "You've been crying, haven't you? I can see you've been crying." "Of course not," I say defensively. I wasn't going to let him see that I'd been blubbing in the school toilets for ages. I knew he'd call me a big baby. "You have, haven't you? You've been crying. Your eyes are red and puffy." "I think I've got hay fever. They can't stop watering. That's why they're red," I lie. "I don't believe a word of it," said my brother. "It's Luke, isn't it? Nancy said she saw him hanging around with Eloise Parker. Oh my God, he's dumped you, hasn't he?" "If you must know, I dumped him," I pipe. "You dumped him? But why are you upset?" "Because he's moved on so quickly, replaced you with Eloise Parker," chuckles my brother. "Who would date Eloise Parker? She's such a..." "Such a what?" I ask. "You know, teacher's pet, goody two-shoes, wet blanket. She's not nearly as pretty as you either." "You think I'm pretty?" I ask. "No, I wouldn't go that far, sis, but anyone's better than Eloise Parker." "Please can't we stop talking about her?" I say. "I don't want to think about Eloise." "Fine by me, sis." I decide to get out of the house to block Luke from my mind. The visions of him spending time with Eloise Parker was doing my head in. I felt so mad at him for being so offhand with me, dumping me like that, as if I meant absolutely nothing to him. How dare he? I'd love nothing better to shake him so vigorously hard and knock some common sense into him and show him exactly what he's lost. I amble over to the yard shed to get my bike, with Jinxie, our Irish wolfhound, following excitedly behind me. He wasn't used to getting a walk in the afternoon like this, so he was over the moon, thumping his tail and jumping around exuberantly, as if all his Christmases had come at once. "Woof, woof, woof," he barks appreciatively. "Where are you going, sis?" my brother asks me. "I'm taking Jinxie for a walk to the woodgrove. I won't be long." "Shouldn't you tell Mummy where you're going?" "You tell her." "All right, but make sure you're not long, or she'll do her nut. You know what she's like." I sighed with relief when I climbed on the back of my bicycle. I always found cycling in the prepossessing countryside so liberating, so exhilarating, so uplifting, the quintessential antidote to those desolate, glum, gloomy, heavy-hearted feelings that could so easily get you down. Somehow being out in the natural world was a powerful antidepressant, and whenever I was despondently sad, taking a ride on the back of my bicycle had always miraculously lifted me out of my comfortless melancholia. I felt as free as a bird, unshackled, untethered, unconfined by all the worries that had cruelly held me hostage during the worst day ever. A cool, refreshing breeze was blowing against my hair, and Jinxie was dutifully following behind me. It was as if for a brief, blissful moment all the troubles of the world had been lifted off my shoulders, and my salty tears were evaporating like a dried-up old riverbed. My ravaged heartbreak had momentarily been confiscated, as if it had all been just a bad dream. Oh, my word, it was such an incredible day. The afternoon sunshine cast its shafts of sunlight across the grey asphalt road, hugging me magnanimously with its effusive warmth, while many of the trees fringing the road on either side were mirrored in this grey granular expanse, like the delicate reflections on a silvery lake. The voluptuous contours of their boughs moved against the frisky breeze, as if the trees were all dancing. At least they had something to be happy about, I thought.
on a day when my heart had been so heinously broken by my heedlessly inconsiderate 16-year-old boyfriend Luke, whom had unmindfully shown me today of all days that he didn't give a damn about me. Well, it was his huge loss. He'd soon learn that Eloise Parker was no patch on me. When he came running back to me, begging me to forgive him, there would be another boy on my arm. See how he'd like that. I would look at him with the same contemptuous opprobrium and derision that he'd shown me today, and say, "Get over it, Luke." It would seem that for me, entertaining such malignantly revengeful, waspish thoughts was offering me a great measure of satisfaction. I knew that Eloise Parker would not hold Luke's attention for very long. I was sure of that. Jinxie was barking happily, while the blue sky hovered above us, scattered with a few white fluffy clouds. There were a couple of birds circling the firmament with outstretched wings. I think they were kites, but I couldn't be sure, as I was no expert on our feathery friends, of which we get many unusual species in this part of the world. On the horizon, lounging lazily under the sun, like old friends you've known all your life, were the rugged lineations of the mountains. Like two fat ladies were sunbathing proudly, squatting luxuriously on their sizable girths, their imposing silhouettes never failing to grab one's attention. Before long I'd reached the woodgrove, where I parked my bike against one of the trees and pulled out my tennis ball from my pocket. "Get it, Jinxie," I cry. He dashes after the ball, and I throw it for him again and again and again. I love this woodgrove with all my heart. It's the go-to place for many people in our part of the world, that know about it, that is, with fabulous precipitous trails that wind through the woods, where Douglas firs, western cedars, hemlocks and maple trees congregate happily together. It's quite common to see people walking their dogs here in the late afternoon, but I only see old Mrs. Melansky coming through the woodgrove with her two black Scotties today. "Hello, Frida. How are you today?" she asks, as her dogs enthusiastically greet mine. "I'm fine, Mrs. Melansky. And you?" "Let's just say, Frida dear, it's been one of those days today when everything's gone wrong from the very moment I woke up. I always come to the woodgrove to relieve my stress on days like this." "Don't worry, Mrs. Melansky. I've also had a lousy day today. You're not alone in that." "Oh dear, I'm sad to hear that, dear. Maybe there's something in the water today. See you around, Frida." "See you around, Mrs. Melansky." I was glad to see that the woodgrove was so quiet, not a single soul in sight. And in the late afternoon, the light was beginning to change. It was softening, the shadows twinkled through the canopy. My feet enjoyed the feeling of crunching bracken and twigs beneath the soles of bright orange sneakers, while my dog Jinxie got caught up in a sensory paradise where he was smelling everything with an enthusiastic gusto and lifting his leg up on every available surface to leave his autograph behind for any other dogs, to let them know that Jinxie had been there. The walk in the woodgrove had been pleasant. I was feeling very uplifted. Somehow the fresh air and the exercise nursed my festering wounds, and, of course, the soulful melancholia. It was only when I retreated out of the woodgrove that I knew something was off. Jinxie was barking, as if he too was a little off-centre. I searched for my bicycle, that was parked against the gnarled oak tree, but it wasn't there any more. Not my bike, or even the gnarled oak tree. I was so bewildered. I knew what my mother would say, that I was becoming scatty, but this was not the case. I knew my bearings. I knew this woodgrove like the back of my hand. I had played here as a young girl hundreds of times over. I even knew individual trees and landmarks, and this woodgrove appeared to have changed, and my bike was nowhere to be found. I was grateful to see that Jinxie was looking as befuddled as I was. So I wasn't going completely mad. I had no idea what my mother would say if I returned home minus my bicycle that had been given to me for Christmas. It was an expensive gift, but I couldn't help it, could I, if someone had stolen it? I can see my mother telling me off for parking it in a conspicuous place where it could be seen. But then again, in our small town, we had never ever had problems with theft before. As I trudge along the road back home, everything feels different. And the only way I can describe it to you, it's as if you've been away from your small town for 15 years or more, and you return over a long period of absence or a lengthy sabbatical when so much has changed. Trees have grown exponentially. Extensive renovations have occurred to properties. House colours are different. It was like that in our neighbourhood, but not over a lengthy period of time, within the course of a 20-minute walk. I thought I was losing my mind. The house colours in our street had changed in a matter of minutes, and tiny trees appeared to have grown into skyscrapers, and Mrs. Morris, whose dilapidated house was the eyesore of our town, as it was crumbling and falling apart, seemed to have been miraculously renovated and restored into an attractive building with pristine lawns, manicured hedges, and colourful flower beds. Gone were the overgrown grass, angry, ugly weeds that punnelled their way aggressively through her lawn. Gone were the warped rafters and the jagged cracks across her house. All the houses in our street were different. What the hell was going on? Finally, I get to my home. It's exactly the same house in every way, but instead of white walls, the house is painted in a coral colour, with a black roof. It's much prettier than our house, that I actually know. The garden is dreamy, filled with an abundance of mixed perennials. Let's just say, even if our house was undergoing a makeover, there is no way that in a matter of 20 minutes my house could change from white to coral. That just doesn't happen. You would think I would be afraid, but fear did not even enter the equation for me. I was confounded, and a feeling of discombobulated disorientation had commanded my immediate focus. I get to our front door. The one I'm used to has scratches from Jinxie on the outside, but this front door is gleaming brightly. It's polished in a black colour, with a very fancy golden knocker. For a moment I consider knocking, and then I realise that's silly. I mean, this is my home after all, even if it has undergone some strange metamorphosis. I push open the door, to find that it doesn't squeak like my door at home, and I call out again, "Ma'am, ma'am, are you there?" A young boy of about my age, about 16 or 17, is standing in the entrance hall staring at me blankly, with a befuddled look on his face. "Who are you?" he asks. "I'm Frida," I say. "Who are you?" "I'm Martin. Why did you just barge into our house like this? Haven't you heard of knocking?" I stammer awkwardly. I'm not sure exactly what's going on." "That makes two of us. I don't know why you came around today. I sent messages to everyone. You should have got yours. Mum's not taking piano lessons for the next few days. I'm afraid she's come down with a bad cold. She's not feeling great. I take it you must be one of her pupils." I'm just about to answer when a woman in a dressing gown comes into the entrance hall, blowing her nose. She looks as white as a ghost. She really is sick. "I'm sorry, Mum. I thought I'd cancel all your pupils today. But Frida here obviously never got my message, so she's turned up for her piano lesson. I've just been telling her you're not seeing pupils because of your flu." "This young lady is not one of my pupils, son. Who are you?" she asks me. "My name is Frida," I say, looking confused. "What's going on here?" Martin and his mother give each other a strange look. "This is my home," I explain. "I live here with both of my parents and my brother. Only my home is white. It's not as pretty as this. It's not this coral colour. I left it a moment ago for a walk in the woodgrove. I've just come back from the woodgrove. The whole neighbourhood has changed. And now you're living in my house, and I don't know who you are. I mean, this is the town of Roslyn, is it not?" "Sweetheart," says the woman, "are you on medication or something? Do you have a doctor I can call for you?" "I'm not sick. I don't have medication. Is this the town of Roslyn? It's not a difficult question to ask. Is it or is it not?" "No, sweetheart. This town is actually called Whitebridge. I've never heard of Roslyn before." "I don't understand." "Look, dear, maybe you had a fall or something and are suffering from a concussion causing amnesia. Did you bump your head or something? I'll call Dr. Hughes for you if you like. He'll sort this out. He'll get you back home to your parents." "No, it's fine," I say, backing out of the door. I call out to Jinxie, who's sniffing around the yard and lifting her leg up on everything. Come, Jinxie, let's go. I decide to run back to the woodgrove. I see a couple of boys riding bicycles. Excuse me, I say. What's the name of this town? Are you having a laugh? Asked one of the boys. This is the town of Whitebridge. I haven't seen you around here before. Who are you? That's because I live here, but I don't, I say. The boys give each other bewildered looks. You're not making sense. Believe me, I respond, nothing is making any sense right now. When I reach the woodgrove, I decide that if I walk in there again and come out, maybe the horrors of what have just transpired will just go away miraculously. A little like walking around a maze and finding the correct entrance. But lo and behold, I keep finding there is no gnarled oak tree when I exit the forest and no sign of my parked bicycle again and again. I'm so confused, I don't know what to do. So in despair, I sit underneath an oak tree and begin to cry. I want to get back home, but I don't know how to. I don't understand how even the name of the town I know so well has changed. What is going on? All of a sudden, Jinxie is barking. I sense something or someone is watching me. I look up to see a Bigfoot standing yards away from me, and he's staring at me with a perturbed look on his human-like face. It's like his expression is saying, "What are you doing here?" It's like he knows I don't belong here. In normal circumstances, I would be confounded, afraid even. But everything that is transpiring to me right now is fallaciously surreal, airily unorthodox, phantasmagoric, that if a bunch of dinosaurs was to come thundering through the forest right now, like in Jurassic Park, I probably wouldn't even batter an eyelid. The Bigfoot is huge. I mean, he's easily over 9 foot tall, 800 pounds, and 4 foot wide across the shoulder area. He's covered in long, flowing, dark brown hair. I can see the grey skin beneath that reveals a remarkable muscular density that would almost certainly be the envy of any bodybuilder, as this creature is impressively ripped, with overlong arms that travel beyond his knees, and powerful legs built like 2 sizable tree trunks. The Bigfoot's pyramid-shaped head is low slung on his shoulders. His face is so human, only rugged and weathered-looking, with a wizened look about it. For some reason I find myself staring at the Bigfoot's eyes, and in them I can see an intelligence that I've never seen in eyes before. It's like his eyes could see beyond this world, if that was possible. For some reason I feel as if I can talk to this Bigfoot. I sense he might actually be able to help me with my strange dilemma, my obvious pickle that I've got myself entangled in. My dog Jinxie is smelling the Bigfoot very intently and embarrassingly has his obtrusive, investigative, trespassing nose firmly parked in the Bigfoot's groin. And worse still, he begins to lick it with his long pink tongue, and then does something that unsettles me so much. He lifts his leg up on the Bigfoot and pees on the creature, and smells the spot as if to say, "Good, I've left my mark on you. Now I own you." "I'm so sorry," I say. The Bigfoot is not remotely concerned, but leans over to stroke Jinxie, who looks like a toy poodle next to the Bigfoot, and Jinxie is not a small dog. "Can you help me?" I ask the Bigfoot. "I can't find my way home. I come from the town of Roslyn. This town is Whitebridge. I don't know where I am." The creature looks into my eyes, and I swear he can read me like a book. He takes me by my hand so gently, but I feel like a tiny doll next to him. But I know I can trust him. I also know he can help me. How I know this, I don't actually know. He leads me towards a tree, where I notice prisms of light and dust specks emanating from it, a little like when you shine a torch in a dark place, and you pick up all those dust particles in the light. It looked like that. I stand there for a moment with the Bigfoot. Nothing untoward happens at first, but when the Bigfoot accompanies me through the forest, I find the gnarled oak tree, and my bike perched against it. How did this happen, I wonder? I stood in that prism of light with the Bigfoot, and I'm now back home, as if by magic. I'm so ecstatic, so consumed with relief, that I spontaneously run up to the Bigfoot and hug him. But my arms don't even get very far in cradling him. He's so incredibly large. It's a little like trying to hug a redwood tree. And you know what that's like. You're not going to get your arms around it easily. I unequivocally know that this Bigfoot helped me find my way back home to the town of Roslyn. But where had I been? That was the enigmatic mystery. Thank you, I say to him, tears of relief spilling down my cheeks. I can taste the salt in my mouth. Then I hear the words in my head, "It's only a pleasure." Did the Bigfoot just speak to me? And when I look up at his eyes, they're twinkling, and I know he did speak to me, and I'm flabbergasted. The Bigfoot watches me as I climb onto my bicycle, with Jinxie running behind me. On my route home, I see old Mr. Frank Dowling walking along the road with his black Labrador following him. Let's just say that Frank Dowling is known as the cantankerous, very grumpy character in our neck of the woods. He looks up at me in surprise when I say, "Mr. Dowling, it's so good to see you. Isn't it a wonderful day today?" He grumbles under his breath and walks away, somewhat startled by my effusive, warm greeting. He's not used to anyone being pleased to see him, and he gives me some strange sideward glances. Finally, when I find my way back home and trundle down the driveway, where I park my bicycle against the shed, my mother comes storming out of the house like a belligerent bull. She looks furious, but I'm so thrilled to see her, I can't stop smiling at her like a Cheshire cat. "You think this is funny, Frida? You go to the woodgrove without telling me first, and you've been gone for 2 hours. I've been worried sick about you." I throw my arms around my mother and give her an effusive hug. "Oh, Mum, it's so good to see you. I've missed you so much. I'm so glad to be home." My spontaneous, loving outburst has rather derailed my mother's anger. She hugs me back. "Honestly, Frida, you're so soppy. I'm glad to see you too, but for goodness sake, don't do that to me again. The next time I'll be calling out a search party for you." The next person I throw my arms around is my brother. He retracts and squirms. He hates being manhandled and doesn't like spontaneous gestures of affection. "What's all this about, sis? You're acting as if you haven't seen me in a decade." "You don't know the half of it," I tell him. For a long time I pondered about what could have happened to me on that day when I found myself in another dimension or a parallel universe. I can't be sure. I was to discover that this has happened to many people, not just me, possibly more than would ever dare to admit it, for fear of sounding as if they'd lost leave of their senses. There are all kinds of stories about people who found themselves in parallel universes or a glitch in time. I was to discover that many scientists now support the idea of parallel universes beyond our own. But this multiverse theory does remain controversial. Even Stephen Hawking and Erwin Schrödinger believe in a number of universes much like our own. Max Tegmark believes there are 4 distinctive types of parallel universes, and a recent article I found suggested physicists in Antarctica had found evidence of parallel universes, but I don't need their evidence to prove what I already know. They do exist. I also know that Bigfoot understands these different parallel worlds and universes, and he knows how to access them through portals or something. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to help me in the way that he did. When that creature saw me, he knew I didn't belong to that dimension, which does make me wonder about whether each dimension gives off a discernible frequency. Just a thought. If I could go back in time, I'd find out more about that place I visited, Whitebridge. But I was just too desperate to get out of there and find my safe way back home. To cut a long story short, my remarkable enigmatic experience happened about 30 long years ago. A long time ago, shall we say. Today I'm equally as bad about getting up in the morning. Some things just don't change. I recently got a new Irish wolfhound that I've called Jenky after Jinxie, that has chewed up dozens of my shoes. I don't know what it is about dogs and my shoes, because I don't have smelly feet. But even my husband has commented on how his shoes always remain untouched by the dogs. If you're wondering who my husband is, yes, call me a sucker for punishment. I ended up marrying that obnoxious kid Luke who dumped me for Eloise Parker. Of all the strange things to happen, Luke and his family left our town when I was 17. I never saw him for 10 years, until he turned up for the school reunion. I wanted to hate him, I really did, for what he'd done to me all those years ago. But I surrendered to his charm, and of course it helped he told me that Eloise Parker was his biggest mistake. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, despair can do strange things to people, and we're all incredibly different in how we may react to it. And unbeknown to me, on this inauspicious, bodeful night, I was about to face a tidal wave of my mother's despair, which would take us both on an unlikely journey that none of us would have ever envisaged. But this would be such an eye-opening experience that both me and my mother would have a paradigm shift so incredibly dramatic that all we thought we knew about the world would be flung to the wayside like a cigarette stub or an apple core cast out of the driver's side window onto the road. Were we supposed to confront this fortuitous, enigmatic, outlandish event? To wake us up out of a sleepy slumber? Possibly. I don't actually know the answer to this question, but this is not an escapade that I would wish on my worst enemy, for it is made out of the incongruous, ambiguous stuff that only your darkest nightmares are created from. A fabric, you would say, that slips through your finger like butter, and is so hauntingly bizarre, it's easy to second-guess yourself, and to say, did that really happen? But I assure you, it did. I was driving home from the rural town of Vidalia in Atlanta, Georgia, where me and my best friend Hudson were running a small business together, as there are a lot of ambitious entrepreneurs in this part of the world, starting up little businesses here, which I find encouraging. I was once told, as I'm the numerological number 1, because I was born on the 10th of October, you see, that I'd never ever be happy working for someone else, and this, I think, is intrinsically true. I was to find out a lot of people running small businesses here are in fact the birth number 1, which I think is uncanny. Maybe there is something to this inexplicable mystery. The city of Vidalia is located in Toombs County. It's about 155 miles from Vidalia to Atlanta, following the I-16W route. We are known for our Vidalia onions that were first, funny enough, discovered in Texas. They are a short-stay yellow granary onion that thrive here because of the low sulfur content in the sandy soil, along with the perfect climate, which enables the onions to be particularly sweet. My mother called her first daughter Vidalia, which was very apt, given the location of our farmhouse, which is situated in a rural area not very far from the town, where, believe it or not, my mother grows fields of Vidalia onions for the farmers' market. She hires a farmhand to manage the onions, and we've been producing a great crop every year. Both my 2 sisters have long since left home and are married with children, living in downtown Atlanta, quite close to each other. My mother and father got divorced when I was young, but my father regularly visits us and lives only a half an hour away from us. Let's just say he and my mother have remained the very best of friends over the years, so he has always been a fixture and fitting in our lives, always present for Thanksgiving and Christmases. So for us it was like they never really got divorced, but were living separate lives. My father would always tell us that we love each other, but we just can't live together as husband and wife. It would seem that both my mother and my father swore blind they'd never get married again, or ever enter into a serious relationship, and they were true to their word. They were the kind of idiosyncratic people that were better off single, and the truth is, I don't think they could ever love anyone as much as they adored each other. That was the way it actually was, until my mother met Johnny Olsen, and then her attitude to remaining single shifted dramatically, although marriage was something that remained a red flag to her, and was not something she'd ever choose to entertain. My mother was a maverick, bold, liberated, individualistic, unconventional. She was happy to have an untrampled, casual, carefree relationship. But the trouble was, there was nothing carefree about Johnny Olsen. Even though I was 25 years old at the time, I was still living with my mother, not only for the convenience factor, all the favourable expedients, but because she was all on her own, in that isolated large farmhouse. I wanted to keep a beady, protective eye over her, as I knew being in that sequestered remote home, all on her own, could become terribly lonely. Johnny Olsen was an intense, impassioned character, and I was rather bewildered that my mother was so attracted to the likes of him. He was everything that my mother was not. My mother was emotionally detached, independent, and self-sufficient, but Johnny Olsen was clingy, needy, insecure, jealous, and exceedingly possessive. He was 10 years younger than my mother was, at a mere 50 years old. But my mother was not bothered by the sizable age gap between the two of them, which seemed considerable to me. But then again, what did I know? The first time my mother introduced me to Johnny was actually at a restaurant in Vidalia. I was exceedingly uncomfortable, rather discombobulated about Johnny Olsen from the very beginning. I knew the way he was hanging onto my mother's hand like an insecure 4-year-old did not bode well for her. It was like he was clinging on to her for dear life, like a drowning man grasping onto a rafter out at sea, so incredibly hard that even the rafter looks like it might just break apart, as the pressure placed on it is so immense. We all know, all too well, what happens when you cling to someone hard enough like that. You can drag them down with you, until you both drown. I knew long term that the relationship would start to crack, when my mother became suffocated, or asphyxiated if you like, by this serious but toxic character. At this early honeymoon stage of their relationship, Johnny was throwing out all the stops, serenading my mother's path with a plethora of extravagantly generous gifts, beautiful flowers, streaming compliments, and oodles of charm that oozed out of his mouth like sweet honey. My mother was loving every minute of being needed, adored, loved, and wanted. I could see my mother was radiantly happy. She was glowing vibrantly. She looked younger for her years, as if Johnny had given her a spring to her step. My mother's entire wardrobe had been jeans and sweatshirts every day of the week, but now she was wearing beautiful clothes, long white linen pants with bell bottoms, elegant shoes and tops. She looked marvellous, as if someone had taken her aside and given her a huge makeover. As let's not kid, my mother was an attractive woman, and the efforts she was making with her appearance had made this unassuming diamond quite a showstopper. Even my own father was complimenting her on her appearance and giving her approving sideways glances, as if even he was surprised by how fabulous she looked with a lot of preening. "Oh, what do you think of him, sweetheart?" my mother asked, looking at me with dewy eyes like a teenager experiencing the first shades of love. For a moment, I'm lost for words. What I really wanted to say was being restrained and confiscated from me. I didn't want to throw a spanner in the works. How could I, when my mother looked so incredibly happy? I didn't want to ruin her ebullient, unbridled joy. How could I possibly tell her what I really felt? Believe me, I wanted to, with all my heart. But a small part of me was nudging me to be honest, but in the end I settled for the middle ground, as I didn't want to hurt my mother, but at the same time I didn't want to be overly enthusiastic about her relationship. I knew this was going to end with a crash landing, like an aeroplane losing a wing and nose-diving into the Atlantic. I just knew it with every part of my being.
"He seems nice enough," I say. "Maybe a little clingy. He looks very serious about you. What will you do if he asks you to marry him?"
"Sweetheart, I'm 60 years old. I don't think people get married when they reach my age. You know how I feel about marriage anyway. That's very unlikely to happen."
"I'm not sure, Mother. He looks pretty intense to me. Rather like a Rottweiler dog guarding his bone, the way he watches over you. I think he's definitely the marrying kind, who isn't going to take no for an answer."
At this my mother hooted with laughter. "What are you like, sweetheart?" she giggled. "You always see things that aren't actually there. You're wrong about Johnny Olsen." Weeks drifted into months. I noticed a change in my mother, almost like a diamond that had lost its sparkle, as after being worn so much, it loses its lustre, needs to be polished again. My mother had lost her former ebullience. She seemed a lot flatter in her demeanour, but by all accounts, the relationship with Johnny Olsen was going strong from what I'd been told by her, but I wasn't entirely fooled by that. I knew something would finally give in that relationship, rather like a large crack in the roof tiles, causing the rainwater to leak through the ceiling, so that it crumbles and disintegrates, so finally it's beyond repair. One evening I'm returning home from my job, in an incredibly good mood, as the business was blossoming and the stats showed that we'd increased our profits over the last 6 months by 36%. And for a small business, that's phenomenal growth. I had been to the local delicatessens in a celebratory mood that had not gone unnoticed by the people there who knew me. "What's up?" says my friend Jellica, who works in the local bakery and is putting a homemade cheesecake in a box for me. "If you don't mind my saying so, Simon, you look very happy today. I've noticed you can't stop grinning."
"Is it that obvious?"
I say, flushing a pink colour.
"Just things looking rather good on the business front. Things have improved a lot, so I'm celebrating."
"Oh, I'm thrilled for you, Simon. How's your mother doing?"
"She's very well."
"You're telling me. It's amazing what love does to a woman. These days your mother looks like she stepped out of a bandbox. You think things are serious between her and her new lover?"
"I'm not sure, you know. My mother doesn't talk about the relationship much these days. She did in the beginning, but I choose not to interfere. It's not my place. As long as she's happy, then I'm happy."
"You're a good son, Simon. You really are. I hope you both enjoy the cheesecake."
"Don't you worry about that. We most certainly will."
I had decided I was going to make my mother a fabulous meal tonight to celebrate my great news. So I threw pasta, cream, Parmesan cheese, white wine, champagne, and salad ingredients into a basket to pay for at the counter, where the very friendly, attentive cashier rang up my purchases with a warm smile on her face. I left the delicatessens whistling happily to myself, with a large brown paper bag in my hands, filled with all the quintessential ingredients to make my mother the best spaghetti carbonara she'd ever tasted in her life. Well, that was my intention anyway. The journey home was no different to every other evening. There was no reason to believe that this weekend would be different to any other. But it was getting dark, and where my mother lives, there are no street lights to be seen anywhere. But there are congregations of tall to medium-sized trees gathered together in sumptuous clusters everywhere you look. Farmers' fields, prepossessing views. Let's just say at this time of night, you can't see a single thing, apart from the dark, sultry silhouettes of the trees, embellishing the night sky with their bushy overcoats of leafy regalia. Soon I'm driving down the long, shingly, knobbly, somewhat bumpy driveway in my white Chevrolet Silverado towards my mother's farmhouse. I observe that everything is so dark tonight, much more than is usually the case. The moon seems ambiguously shrouded by a foggy haze. The twinkling stars, usually so arresting at this time of the year, are subdued, as if overcome by a self-conscious reticence, blurred by a pugnacious thicket of uncongenial mist that carpets the sky in an invasive black mantle. I've never seen the house so disturbingly cloaked in darkness before, without any interior or exterior lights on, and it's an unwelcoming, bodeful sight that leaves me feeling more than a little uneasy. A mere month ago I would have been greeted to the congenial barks of our beloved dogs, but they had died within weeks of each other, at the grand old age of 15. The farmhouse had become incredibly lonesome without their gregarious presence. They had been so protective over my mother, and the greatest watchdogs that you've ever seen. But without them around, the house was foreboding, and it was worse without the lights on. I thought something was terribly wrong. I quickly park my truck on the asphalt driveway and make my way cautiously to the front door, and I'm shocked to see that it's wide open. The hallway is steeped in darkness. Everything feels cold, much colder than usual.
"Mum! Mum!" I call out. "Mum, where are you?"
There is no answer, and panic begins to rise up in my gut. Something is horribly wrong. And then I see her. My mother is sitting on the couch in her pyjamas, staring out into space vacantly, as if she's hundreds of miles away from reality, with her arms around her knees, which are drawn up to her chest. There are 2 empty boxes of ice cream on the side, where some of the melted chocolate has spilled out onto the wooden coffee table. I know if the ice cream has been demolished like that,
My mother is incredibly upset. Ice cream is her go-to comfort when all is wrong in her world. My mother looks like a little girl, fragile, insecure, her face as white as snow. I can see in her sorrowful demeanour, she looks as if the entire world has come crashing down upon her shoulders. I immediately dive down onto my knees, throwing my arms around my mother, cradling her. "What's wrong, Mum? Why are you so sad?" "Johnny's left me. He's with someone else," she tells me. "Why would he do that? That makes no sense at all. The two of you seem to be so in love." "I thought we were, but he wasn't happy with us not getting married. I told him we could live together. He would move into the farmhouse with me, but I told him I didn't want us to get married. He gave me an ultimatum." "He did? What did he say?" "He told me if I didn't get married to him, that it was over between us, and he didn't want to proceed with the relationship anymore, because I was wasting his time. He said if I had an inability to commit to him, then it meant I couldn't possibly love him. I thought he was angry with me that he needed to come around to the idea of just living with me, rather than getting married. I gave him the space I thought he needed. And now, I learned from Audrey Markham in town that he's with someone else. He's engaged to that woman who plays the harp in church. I can't believe he's done this to me. How could he be so cruel?" "You mean that very quiet, reticent, self-effacing woman that won't say boo to a goose and dresses so dowdy? What's her name? Anna Macy, isn't it?" "That's her. They've only been dating for 5 days, and they're engaged now. But I want him back. I want him back, but it's too late." I take my mother's hand in mine and give it a comforting squeeze. "You don't want that man back. Believe me, Mum. If he can dump you like that, replace you with a brand new model in 5 days, then you really should be thankful for small mercies. Maybe you think you want him back, but believe me, you don't. You've had a very lucky escape, if you ask me." "What do you mean?" "I mean he's shallow, insincere, narcissistic, if you ask me, desperate to get hitched. Maybe he's done this to make you jealous, but whatever his motivation, you don't want to get caught up in the snares and tangles of his emotional instability. You've always enjoyed your independence, Mother, and that insufferable possessive man was never a good match for you. He was way too intense, overbearing, incredibly needy." "You never told me you thought that about him. I thought you liked him." "I'm sorry, Mum. I didn't want to hurt your feelings at the time. You seemed so happy, but I could see the writing on the wall with that relationship. You and Dad were much better suited. Dad at least gave you your space. You've always been the kind of person that needs lots of space." "How could he replace me like that? I mean, it's as if I meant nothing to him." "I don't know, Mum. I wish I did, but people are complicated. And if he could dump you so quickly, as I was saying before, I am rather inclined to think he has a narcissistic personality. It seems he's desperate to be married, and that's not a good look. He must be incredibly insecure. He's one of those people that just can't bear to be alone, I shouldn't wonder." "Well, he's been married 6 times, you know." "What? Are you kidding me? He's been married 6 times? You never told me this. Did you ask him why he got divorced from all those women?" "He just said they weren't right for him." "But you're so right for him that the moment you put down your foot about marriage, he then replaces you in 5 days? That's rich. What it tells me, Mother, is he's only ever interested in you if you were to become his wife. It's Anna Macy you should feel sorry for. She's the one going to be lumbered with that colossal jellyfish with stingers in his tail that you can't even see." My mother raises herself up from the sofa, groaning as she gets up. "I feel sick, son. I've overdone all that chocolate ice cream. I think I need to take a walk in the woodgrove. The exercise will make me think more clearly." "You are joking. You can't go walking in the woodgrove at this time of night, especially without any dogs around. Those woods can be terribly menacing. I wouldn't be comfortable with you being out there on your own. It would unsettle me greatly. Have you seen how dark it is out there? The moon tonight is not exactly friendly, with all that murky mist obscuring her luminescence. Why don't you go for a walk in the morning?
I won't be walking in the woodgrove. The trees at night actually intimidate me. But I will walk along the road. It's perfectly safe there. There are no cars around. I've done it many times before.
Mum, I'd rather you didn't, especially without the dogs. For a start, let me put the lights on in the house. The house is so sombre. It feels like a morgue in here. I really wish you would agree to get another dog, Mum. This place is so lonesome without one.
How can I replace my dogs like that? It's not right.
Of course it's right. Do you think Salt and Pepper would be happy to see you brooding here in your own melancholia like this? They would be very upset about that. They got very distressed when you were emotional, don't you remember? They'd want you to go and find yourself another dog, another companion. It would do you so much good, and I would feel much better if I knew you had a dog watching over you. I've bought some food in the back of my car. I tell you what, how about I make us some spaghetti carbonara and some salad? We can talk over glasses of champagne. You'll feel a whole lot better. Now you sit there, watch something on the box. I don't want you to do a single thing. I've got this all nipped in the bud for you.
Thanks, son. That's so kind of you, says my mother, flickering through the television stations and settling on a movie that appears to have some promise. I sigh with relief. Thank God my mother got rid of that crazy idea about walking along the road in the dark like that. I had driven down it moments before, and it seemed less than inviting tonight.
Supper won't be long, I assure her. I'll call you when it's ready.
I efficiently bring in the shopping from the car and unload the paper bag on the granite kitchen countertop. I assiduously get to work with pasta. I boil salted water on the hob. I fry up pieces of bacon. I add cream and white wine, folding in egg yolks and Parmesan cheese. The kitchen smells delicious as a savoury aroma filters over the house. I whistle happily to myself, feeling a clandestine sense of satisfaction that dreadful intensive man is out of my mother's life, and although she's sad and reflective, I know she will bounce back with her usual ebullience and face life again with open arms. Soon I have the spaghetti in the frying pan. Looks like a work of art that Gordon Ramsay himself would be proud of. The steam billows up from the pasta, and with a fork I taste it for seasoning. It's delicious. It melts into my mouth like butter. The pasta is perfectly al dente, with all the essential bite to it. My mother should enjoy this, I think proudly to myself. Nothing like a good pasta dish to iron away the seeds of despair.
Supper's ready,
I say, as I enter the living room, only to find that my mother is not there. But she's left the television on, blaring away, and there's a note on the coffee table with a red scribble which reads, "Just gone for a quick walk along the road. Won't be long. I've taken bear spray with me and a torch. I'll be back in 20 minutes. I just need to clear my head. Don't fret about me, son. I'll be fine. Keep the pasta warm for me, won't you? I'm sure I have worked up an appetite by the time I return." I am not happy. My intransigent mother can be willfully obstinate at the very best of times. I should have known she'd do this. She's not the kind of person you can ever persuade to just sit down, relax and put your feet up, if she's got other ideas going on in her head. She's as stubborn as a mule, obdurate, dogmatic. Suffice to say, when her headstrong mind is set on something, wild horses will not tear her away from her intentions. That has been the case all my life. Should I go after her, I wonder, or should I give her the benefit of the doubt and trust she'll be back soon? My mother has always needed her space, and when she's upset, it's always plenty of walking and bowls of ice cream that she tends to gravitate to. I mean, she has taken bear spray with her, hasn't she? So why should I worry? She'll be fine, I tell myself. Marianne. My mother's account. I know my son means well, and bless his cotton socks, but my mind is a whirlwind of emotion tonight, and seeing the happy, loving couple on television, swooning over each other in this romantic love scene, has made me sick to my stomach. It's reminding me of what I've lost. In the beginning, Johnny Olsen had been the quintessential charmer that had melted my heart like butter. It had been so long since anyone had given me so much attention, and we fell hard for each other. Well, at least I thought we did. I remember I met him when he went crashing into the side of my car, when I was pulling out of the parking bay, and he didn't actually see me. We exchanged numbers, and he asked me to coffee, and the charm just oozed out of him, and I fell for him hook, line and sinker. Of course, when I learnt he'd been married so many times before, it was a little bit of a red flag, but I soon got over that. In the cold, brutal light of day, the old me would have run from a man like that as fast as a March hare being chased by a fox. The trouble is, emotions are not driven by common sense. They're navigated by our heart. So sometimes the heart can be whimsically naive, impressionable, easily seduced. That was me. Things changed dramatically, though, for me, when I told Johnny I didn't want to get married to him, after he begged me to fly to Las Vegas with him, and tie the knot with him in one of those package ceremonies. When I said no, something in him turned right off, like a tap changing from hot to cold. In the beginning, let's say, he'd been far too clingy. It would actually get on my nerves. Sometimes I would feel as if he was closing in on me. But he loosened his control over me when I said no. I told him I loved him, that he could move in with me into the farmhouse, where we could be happy together. But I didn't do the marriage thing. He was not happy about that at all. I remember he looked at me through his hardened eyes that became so icy cold. He said, "If that's the way you feel, I'll be seeing you." He stormed out of the house like a belligerent bull going after a matador's red flag. He slammed the front door behind him so hard, I thought I'd jump out of my skin. He backed out of the driveway so fast that he nearly went crashing into the oak tree there. I had never seen him so enraged, so incandescent before. Even his pugnacious jowls were jiggling with indignation, and then he was gone. In truth, I thought he'd be back, that he needed some space to come to terms with my feelings about marriage, that he would soon calm down, see the sense in my opinion. Imagine my surprise when, during a trip to town, I learnt from Audrey Markham, a very good friend of mine, that my boyfriend was now hitched and getting married to the demure, reticent woman that played the harp in our church. I was to learn that they'd met fortuitously, in a rather familiar way, when he slammed into the side of her vehicle by accident, when she was backing out of a car parking space. And, of course, he had apologized profusely and insisted on taking her out to coffee, giving her the same charming, very flattering one-liner that he'd applied to me, that had melted the cockles of my heart. "My car's got exceptional taste, I have to say. How terribly fortunate I am to have bumped into an angel. Things are looking up for me indeed. If you ask me, our meeting is serendipitous. I must ask you to join me for coffee." I began to wonder if this was how he providentially met all his previous wives, accidentally on purpose, by ramming into their cars. I suppose it's cheaper than using a dating service. After that stinging, painful news, I realized I'd been so quickly replaced, dismissed, rejected, which rarely hurt and injured my sense of self. It made me wonder if Johnny had loved me at all. I returned home that day, my head spinning. Part of me irrationally wanted him back, and God only knows why. Maybe I was jealous of Anna Macy, now having her claws solidly entrenched into my boyfriend. The truth was, my son was absolutely right. I was well rid of him. When I returned home, I sat there, wallowing in the darkness, staring vacantly out into space, lost in my own melancholia, the muddy wasteland of my distress, whilst getting through what seemed like gallons of chocolate ice cream, to ease away the numbing pain that I was feeling, the desolate sense of loneliness and isolation, the close companions of hopelessness. Of course, it didn't help that I'd lost my two best furry friends. within 2 weeks of each other, very recently. Let's just say I hadn't been quick to replace them, like Johnny had been to replace me. But I knew my son was right. A farmhouse without a dog is a very lonely place indeed. Now that my son was home, bustling around busily in the kitchen, making a pasta dish for us, the need to go out for a walk just became overwhelming. I so needed the fresh air, the space, the exercise. It was a dreadful pity I didn't have a dog to accompany me. But what the hell? I knew my protective son would not be happy with me wandering off in the night. But I was only going up the road, for goodness sake, and I wouldn't be gone for very long. I remove my pyjamas and throw on a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt, along with a pair of sneakers and a windbreaker, and I put a headlamp on my head and some bear spray in my pocket. I wisely decide to leave the television on, so my son won't suspect that I'm gone. I clandestinely creep out of the front door and walk down our long, rather bumpy driveway towards the dirt road. I'm flooded with an enormous sense of relief to be out in nature, even at night. I find the natural world helps me escape from all my problems. It makes me realise that in the great grand scheme of things, my problems are so tiny, so minuscule, so insignificant, which is a very comforting feeling indeed. At the end of the day, things will get better for me. I've seen it so many times before, like when a field has been burnt to a cinder, and the grass is as black as coal. But in no time at all, the green shoots of recovery are auspiciously seen, as the black grass regenerates and becomes greener, greener than it ever was before. That's what it'll be like for me. I'll get over Johnny and move on with my life. If the earth can regenerate herself, so can I, and I'll be damned if Johnny steals my joy. I won't let him do that to me, never. He'll never have that satisfaction. The night is tenebrous. The moon is hiding her luminescent face behind some stuporous, indistinct, misty cloud cover, and even the stars are pacified, subjugated by this sweeping carpet of maliciously uncongenial fog that has chastened their sparkle away. The unilluminated road that I'm walking down is precariously rocky, so it's not easy, but I don't care. They've been meaning to asphalt this road for ages, but nothing is ever done about the problem. But then, this being an isolated location, the authorities obviously have bigger fish to fry, and this long stretch of barren road remains at the bottom of their must-do list. Despite the ample light from my torch, the Caligonous night is gloomy, sombre, crepuscular, and without my torchlight, I probably wouldn't be able to see very much. Well, not really. The moonlight is minimal. In truth, it complements how I feel, as so I'm not really intimidated by it. I'm just grateful to be walking down this road, throwing the focus of my thoughts away, rather like potato peelings in a dumpster, and just aiming on enjoying this me-time. It's an airy, inauspicious night. There are no frogs or crickets singing their tuneful chorus. Their sounds always give me a sense of reassurance, but they are alienated from the night, like underage youngsters being booted out from an adult bar. If I wasn't so caught up in the upheaval and tangle of my emotions, I would have paid attention to how quiet and still the night had become. The only thing I can hear is the rustle of leaves, as a gentle caressing wind sweeps across the road, giving me little kissing nudges on my cheek. Then I see it, squatting in the middle of the road. At first it looks small, inconspicuous, obscure, and from the side profile I think there's a dog run over in the middle of the road. So I quickly run towards the poor thing, eager to help it if I can. My mind so gratefully glad to be thinking of something else other than myself. But it is when I'm feet away from the dog that its head swivels round to look directly at me, glaring at me through menacing bright red eyes, the colour of traffic lights. This iniquitous, godless creature that looks like something the devil spat out, a piece of his chewing gum perhaps, stands up on 2 feet, rises up at about 8 feet off the ground. I realise it has the body of a man, the face of a wolf, and this thing, it is not pleased to see me. Not one bit. Indeed, the very fact that I dared to approach him so presumptuously, when I had grievously mistaken him for a dog, has gone down with him like a lead balloon.
This creature has a haughty, prideful, stuck-up arrogance that is not acquainted with the nature of a dog. In fact, the air is literally smoking and steaming with the creature's wrathful indignation.
The iniquitous look he is giving me says it all that I actually need to know.
I want to eat you.
I stare at the creature, unable to comprehend what I'm perceiving.
No, this is not real. There is no way this is real. It's a trick of the light. It's my imagination. I must be dreaming.
But I know I'm not. My legs tremble beneath me. I become unsteady on my feet, like a wobbly camping chair. I try to run backwards, keeping my eyes deliberately fixed on the creature. My movements are clumsy, uncoordinated, restrained by a reluctant fear that has seized me under its powerful grip, held me hostage to the surreal tension of this poignant moment that is so pronounced you can cut it with a knife. I know I should run away as fast as I possibly can. But nothing is working. My body is not reacting like it should. It's like my motor instincts have become paralyzed, like a stalling car that simply refuses to start unless you bring out the jumper leads and give the engine one hell of a wallop. If someone were to throw a bucket of ice-cold water over my head, if only, then my instincts might just roll into action, and I would start up like a purring engine. But right now, the moment has ensnared me, like an otter, helpless in a trap, and it's like all common sense and rational reasoning has eluded me, along with my instincts that have wantonly abandoned me. Oh my God! This creature is the most terrifying thing I have ever beheld. Is he a werewolf, I wonder? The creature has a snout covered in blood, as if he's recently eaten and has failed to lick away the evidence. He's drooling as he looks at me, and this is not the drool you would see from your average dog. This creature's drool is elastic. It springs out of his mouth in a foaming goo. The next thing I know is he pulls back his mouth to display his sharp incisor teeth. And this is not normal. He has 2 rows of teeth, human-like hands and feet with insanely sharp claws instead of nails. The creature lets out the most discomposing growl that literally reverberates through my entire body. And that is the jumper lead that I've been needing to get myself started. I turn around and run, while he is roaring behind me. I don't know why I'm bothering to run. I might as well surrender to my fate. I know I'm already dead. There is no way on God's earth that I'm going to get out of this pickle alive. It's not possible. A large hand grabs me. Claws dig violently into my skin. I yelp out in pain as the creature scratches into my flesh through my windbreaker. That's how sharp his talons are. The creature throws me on his back like a sack of oranges. My terrified, strident, high-pitched screams ring through the night like a resounding bell, but no one hears me, as my screams are absorbed like the water in a sponge. The vibrational plagency of my hopeless, desperate cries are lost in the wind, blending seamlessly into its wailing resonance, becoming one with it. I try desperately to fight back, but I just can't. The smell of this hostile, vindictive creature is disgustingly putrid. I've never ever smelt a smell like this, and hope to never again. He smells of death and decay. The creature runs like the wind with me on his back. I don't know where he's going, but his movements are very jolty, very uneven. I'm now praying to God earnestly that it'll be over for me quickly. I don't want to feel any pain. The next thing I know is the creature is running towards the abandoned house that is parked away from the ditch on the side of the road. An old woman lived there once, about 4 years ago, but she's disappeared. No one knew what actually happened to her, and the authorities weren't able to trace her family members. Why is he bringing me here? The house is falling apart. The rambling creepers are hungrily devouring the house. Their tenacious tentacles have plundered the roof and are growing down the inside walls. The creature charges through an open door, his ponderous feet crashing across warped floorboards. Even though I cannot see a thing, I can smell damp, mildew, decay and dust. The creature throws me in the toilet cubicle. He locks the outside door. I'm now trapped in the bathroom. How did the creature know about locking doors? I am stunned by how intelligent this wolf-like humanoid really is. This is a worse fate than I could have ever envisaged for myself. I imagine the creature's not hungry now. That's why there was blood all over his mouth. He's probably already eaten, so he's locked me away for the time being. Now I have to sit here, like a percolating cup of coffee, waiting, stewing, marinating, and festering in my trepidation, until he decides it's dinner time. I put down the toilet seat and sit down. I'm sure the loo is disgusting. I'm thankful it's too dark to see anything. You'd think I'd be crying, but I sit there stoically on the loo seat, waiting for my fate. I know the creature has gone, as the ghastly stench of death and decay has finally left. How I wish I'd brought my cell phone with me, but I'd left it charging on the side next to my son's cell phone. And to my horror, I discover that my bear spray is no longer in my windbreaker. It must have fallen out. I'd forgotten all about it in my angst. I could have used it on the creature when he came back for me. What a bummer. I don't understand how this could have happened. Back to Simon. I'm now frantic. I know something is terribly, terribly wrong. I can taste it, feel it, and sense it in every fibre of my being. My mother wasn't back, and an hour had gone by. Let's just say she was nowhere to be seen. I was more than a little concerned. Even if she was walking along that road, anything could happen to her walking around in the pitch-black night like this. And that road is tumultuously rocky. It would be very easy to trip. I quickly grab my keys, climb into my car, and drive down the road very slowly to see if I can see any sign of my mother. But I am greeted to the dark, foreboding night, and to a profound sense that something is really off. As I drive down the road, there is no sight and sound of my mother anywhere. All of a sudden, my car swerves, and I end up with my wheels caught up in a ditch on the side of the road. I swiftly climb out of my car to see how bad the ditch actually is, and how best to manoeuvre it out of the muddy trap. I prudently shine my torch over everything, when I catch sight of some bear spray lying in the ditch close to a monstrous footprint that rarely looks like a wolf imprint. But this track is massively large. I'm now fearing the worst. Has my mother been seized by a predator of some kind? I happen to glance up and see the silhouette of the abandoned house, and given that I found the bear spray close to the house, I decide just to check it out. I'm glad I did, as when I call out my mother's name, I hear her banging and shouting out, "I'm in here! I'm locked up in the toilet cubicle!" I quickly run into the house, opening up the door of the toilet, and my mother flings herself into my arms. "How did you know I was here? How did you know I was here?" "I didn't," I say. "I found your bear spray in the ditch, and since it was close to the abandoned house, I thought I ought to check it out. Let's get out of here now." "Let's get out of here now, I agree," says my mother, looking at me through eyes rounded with terror. "It could come back! It could come back! It was going to kill me!" I had seen the wolf imprint, so I don't ask any questions, but quickly escort my distraught mother back to my truck. She's shaking like a leaf and trying to talk, but words are failing her. They're not coming easily. But she kept saying, "Wolf! Wolf!" Lo and behold, with my mother in the truck, I managed to manoeuvre my truck out of the ditch, and then I see it, in the middle of the road, screaming at the both of us. A humanoid wolf-like creature, thin at the waist and huge at the shoulders, covered in pitch-black hair, running towards us, screaming like a banshee, and launching itself at the car like a charging rhino. I've never seen anything so hideously grotesque in all my life. The creature begins to run with my car, side by side, glaring at me through the window. I pull open the window and spray out the bear spray into its eyes, and it screams loudly at the top of its lungs and runs into the night. Let's just say it took us weeks to get over this dreadful incident, but my mother reckons coming so close to death meant getting over Johnny Olsen was actually an easy ordeal. I did go back to the abandoned house in the day armed to the nines with a rifle. I did see signs of a nest on one of the floors, and a few wolf-like tracks on the wooden panels, but there were no signs of the creature anywhere. All these years later, I wonder what the hell it was, but my views of the world have changed dramatically. Nothing is as it seems. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.